The House will come to order. I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that the vote on the Smith Amendment as amended to be reconsidered.
Representative Niska moves that we reconsider the vote on the Smith Amendment. Discussion. I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Long.
I ask for support.
All those in favor of the motion to reconsider on the Smith Amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed say nay. The motion prevails. I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Long.
Mr. Speaker, I ask that we consider the A18 Greenman secondary.
Representative Long moves that we reconsider the A18 Greenman Amendment. Any discussion? I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Long, for working with us to make this bipartisan bill remain bipartisan. I urge member support.
All those in favor of reconsidering the Greenman A18 amendment, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed say nay. No. The motion prevails. The clerk will report the Greenman amendment.
Greenman moves to amend the Smith Amendment to House File Number 4138, the third engrossment as amended. The amendment to the amendment is coded A18.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Long. I recognize the member from Olmsted, Representative Smith.
Thank you, Speaker. Talked a lot about this bill. Just to be clear, what it does is it requires social media companies to report to the BCA when there are potential mass shootings, and there are a number of threat factors. Please, let's have a roll call on this.
Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Smith.
Members, I would say vote yes, and to all members, I would say be sure you're on the board.
Any further discussion on the amendment, to the amendment? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment to the amendment. Again, do not. The clerk will call the names of the members voting remotely.
Momani Hiltsley.
Momani Hiltsley, aye.
Momani Hiltsley votes aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 67 yeas and 67 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment to the amendment is not adopted. Now to the underlying amendment. The clerk will report the underlying amendment.
Smith moves to amend House File Number 4138, the third engrossment as amended, and the Smith Amendment is coded A13.
Discussion to the amendment. I recognize the member from Olmsted, Representative Smith.
Roll call vote, Speaker.
Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Smith.
So we are now on the underlying amendment as amended. That is a bit more broad for the see something, say something for social media companies. I would ask a green vote.
Any further discussion on the amendment? I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Kraft.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a point, during the break, I had a nice conversation with some of the pages who are, many of them, 16, 17-year-olds. So if we want to see who our votes are impacting today, we have them right in front of us. Thank you.
Further discussion. I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And so just to be clear, what we're voting on is the underlying Smith Amendment with the Myers Amendment added. And so I would encourage a no vote, but thank you.
Any further discussion on the Smith Amendment? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will call the names of the members voting remotely.
Momani Hiltsley.
Momani Hiltsley, aye.
Momani Hiltsley votes aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 82 yeas and 50 nays, the motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There is an amendment at the desk. The chief clerk will report the amendment.
Bonner moves to amend House File Number 4138, the third engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A14.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Bonner.
Thank you, members. So the A14 was intended to address some technical issues around the bill that potentially open us up to liability on this particular bill, to challenge from a legal perspective, as well as the fact that this language twists ourselves into pretzels, but it doesn't really actually address the underlying way in which the technology actually operates. The more importantly, what this bill does is it allows us to do some rulemaking with the Department of Commerce to better reflect the way in which technology actually works, to have the flexibility to grow with the way in which the technology might change or ebb and flow. That is what the amendment was intended to do. Unfortunately, there is also a drafting error in the A14 that incorporates some changes that were not intended to be in that technical amendment. It is still my assertion that those technical amendments need to be made, and that if they are not made, that we will face some significant court challenges, as well as potentially opening up a 14-day window in which we are collecting and storing data on children that I think I heard from many of you is not something you would appreciate or desire to do. So with that, I am going to withdraw the A14 amendment for today and ask the authors to strongly consider working to make sure that that rulemaking process be done in the Senate, and that we make those necessary changes to make the bill stronger and defend against legal challenges, as well as address the underlying way in which the technology actually works, which is not reflected in the language of the bill. Thank you.
Representative Bonner withdraws the A14 amendment. There are no further amendments at the desk. The chief clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File Number 4138 as amended.
Third reading. Discussion. I recognize the member from Chisago, Representative Reimer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members, and for all the work that's gone into this bill. One impressive part about this bill is how technically precise it is. We're requesting specific changes to social media platforms, and the stated goal is to reduce the harms impacted through through ongoing social media use for our kids. And one thing I just wanted to point out was that this house can often be a house of hypocrisy, because I recall House File 1434, and we're legislating the technology used in social media addiction, but we couldn't get one Democrat vote in order to do the same thing for pornographic websites. So I just wanted to point out, as we pass this bill on, it sounds like we will today, that we are legislating potential YouTube video views for my kids who want to watch maybe tutorials on how to build Lego sets. But we did not have that same energy for graphic pornographic websites. And I wanted to point out that that is the wrong message to send to Minnesotans today. So I appreciate all the work that's been done on this bill. I wish we would have the same energy and enthusiasm when it comes to regulating graphic, pornographic websites as we take this vote. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Engen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to Representative Scott. I think that this starts to turn the page in the chapter that we've had where big tech companies are allowed to claim that they're helping society with communication, access to information, and helping us be more social. But instead, they've actually been exploiting children, exploiting the most vulnerable amongst us. No, kids are not just an ad revenue source. Kids are not a pawn to be made into a potential victim from people, evil people, who are online trying to groom and exploit them. But that's happening every single day right now on platforms as big as Meta and as small as Roblox. That needs to end. We need to put humans first again, not just these tech oligarchs, because that's what they are. This is the start. This is a big, big start. But as we go forward, we should be thinking proactively about how we can get ahead of the curve with some of these technological advancements that, quite frankly, parents are not equipped to fully understand as their kid is advancing so much faster than they ever could. And like I said earlier, I was raised as technology was coming up. I had a flip phone, I had a slide keyboard phone, and then I had an iPhone. And those iPhones, when they first came out, pretty big deal. And now I watch as 10, 11-year-olds know how to work them better than sometimes we even do. And with that comes a lot of potentials for harm. Kids as young as 6 years old being sexually exploited on big tech platforms. And Section 230, defense liabilities, makes it so that they're shielded completely from any responsibility to prevent that harm. It's time that they start working for us again. Thank you to Representative Scott for making that happen.
I recognize a member from Ramsey, Representative Feist.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to rise in support of this important legislation. Since I was first elected, issues around technology and their impact on children have been very bipartisan. Worked with Representative Scott on the Student Data Privacy Act and with Representative Robbins on our bill to require schools to come up with a plan for how they're going to approach the impact of cell phones on student behavior, academic attainment, and emotional well-being. So we've done a lot of important work already, and that's always been very bipartisan, and I appreciate that. I was thinking about a conversation I had with a Republican senator about this topic, and he said that, you know, in the past, Democrats didn't trust corporations and Republicans didn't trust the government. But now he's like, I don't know if we trust these big tech companies either. And I was like, well, as a former board member of the ACLU of Minnesota, I never trusted the government or big corporations. So, I don't know. It's nice to see that we are coming into this policy space really united to make a difference. I believe that the fact of passing this bill is as important as the details. With the federal government abdicating its responsibility for our children and to hold these companies accountable, states need to and are stepping up, and I'm just really glad to see that. So thanks to Representative Scott and Representative Smith and Bonner for the work on this important legislation. Thanks.
I recognize a member from Hennepin, Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Speaker. And I agree with both Representative Feist and Representative Engen that, you know, a bill, and particularly the underlying bill that protects kids and their data online, is a really important step. I know that there's been folks who've been working on this for years, and I know that there's more comprehensive work to do, but this is a good first step. And I agree with you, Representative Engen, that these social media companies and these giant tech oligarchs have made it very hard to pass bills like this, regulation that protects kids and, frankly, people from the addictive qualities, from the antisocial qualities, from the qualities that have made this thing in our pockets the most addictive and detrimental technology in a while. And we know that they're hard to pass because of the lobbyists. The thing that we also saw today on this floor is the other big business that makes it very hard to pass bills, and that is the gun industry. And we did not overcome them today. We saw the power of the gun lobby and the gun industry that is pumping billions into selling AR-15s and military-style assault weapons into our communities. But their influence meant that even a provision that simply said that if a part of a threat assessment is whether the threat includes a reference to or a picture or video of a semi-automatic military-style assault weapon as defined in section 624.712. So a reference to current law, that was enough to throw this body into half-an-hour recess and chaos because we couldn't pass a bill with those words in this bill. It didn't even change gun law. It didn't offer the changes that are sitting in that bill that Speaker Demuth is blocking and holding hostage, the comprehensive package that includes so much that our communities are demanding. And so when we talk about what this looks like, we are absolutely in this body taking on big organized interests that do not have the best interests of our kids, of our community, of our public in mind. And it is really unfortunate today that there's only half of us in this body that are willing to stand up to the gun lobby and stand up for the gun industry, stand up to the gun industry, and answer to the people in our communities that are saying, do something about these weapons of war. And so what I hope is that as we go forward, we are looking at those interests that are standing in the way of the public, and we are choosing our kids and communities the way I think this underlying bill does. But we are choosing our kids and communities when it comes from the most dangerous of technologies, which is high-capacity military-style assault weapons and the high-capacity magazines that do so much damage.
I recognize the member from Olmsted, Representative Libeling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Well, Representative Greenman is so right. This bill, in whatever protection it offers to kids, just pales next to the protection that they really need, that they are not getting in this bill or from this legislature. It's really a shame, but I didn't rise to really speak about that. I have some concerns about this bill, and I appreciate Representative Engen's comments about standing up to the tech oligarchs, which I absolutely agree we need to do. It's not easy, and we need to do it. And I also agree with Representative Engen in saying, when he said that parents are not equipped to deal with this. And so I have a little concern about this bill, that the bill especially is not really helping parents with, I think, where Representative Engen was going with this. So as near as I can really understand, what this bill is doing, first of all, it locates a person using whatever tech uses to locate you. You have to be in Minnesota to be subject to this bill. And then it presumes that you are a child unless the data that the company has shows that you are not, to some level of certainty. And then if you are not shown to be an adult, you have to have parental consent to use that website, that platform. And then the effect of having parental consent, if you get it, is that you get a child account where the addictive features, that I think we all pretty much agree that these addictive features are harmful to children, and those addictive features are limited. And as has been pointed out, it doesn't protect children against everything, just those addictive features. So I actually would like to ask the author to yield. Would Representative Scott yield?
She will yield, Representative Libeling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So Representative Scott, given, if I'm correct, as I just kind of described the steps of what this bill is really doing, why do we need the parental consent piece? Why does the bill not just limit the addictive features for all children? Because as we heard from Representative Engen, I think he's correct. Parents don't necessarily have the wherewithal always to understand the technology. There might be, they have to do some kind of contract with the tech industry, as I understand it, under the bill. And if she would yield to that question, then I have a follow-up question.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And, you know, Representative Libeling, Chair Libeling, I would say it's a policy choice that we made. We are wanting, I think it's important that parents have some involvement in these decisions for their kids, because I think it empowers the parents to learn more about what their kids are doing, and they can then see what their kids are involved in online. And so I think it was really a policy choice. We're doing our best to empower parents to make those decisions based on whether they think their kid is, they don't have to give the permission and it automatically just shuts the account down. So I don't know if that's a helpful answer or not.
Representative Liebling.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Scott. I did want people to understand that. If the parents don't give permission, this simply shuts the account down, does not let that young person use that platform at all. And if the parent does give permission, it limits these addictive features. But my next question, if she would yield to another question, Mr. Speaker.
She'll continue to yield. Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, Representative Scott, if the parent decides to give permission, can the platform require, the parent is going to be having some kind of contract with the platform that's going to be part of this permission structure? And can the platform require a waiver of liability at that point from the parent? In other words, if the child then gets that child account, can the platform then say, oh, if your child, say, harmed themselves because of something they saw on the platform or had some other negative effect, could the parent have been required to waive liability, or is there something in the bill that would prevent that waiver of liability?
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Chair Liebling, I don't think that there's an exact provision in this bill that addresses that. As I said, we tried to think of everything, but we couldn't think of everything. So again, the effective date does not happen until next July. So if that's something we need to look at, I'm more than willing to do that. I mean, there is a private right of action in here if the social media company knowingly lets some of these addictive features through, and the child is harmed.
Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks for that answer. So, yeah, I think it is admirable that we are trying to protect children from these addictive features. But I really think that this bill could be banning addictive features for all children, because you're going to have some parents who, for whatever reason, maybe they feel overwhelmed by this whole thing, maybe they give permission without really thinking it through, without reading all the fine print. I mean, how many of us agree to the terms on a website without reading all the fine print? Probably every single one of us. And it's very easy for big tech to slip things in there, and I think that's a real potential problem with the bill, because as Representative Engen noted, parents aren't always equipped to understand all of this stuff, not from the technology point of it and not from the legal point of it. I mean, I'm an attorney, and a lot of times I've been just like, oh, heck, I'm not going to read this whole thing and just give up. And I'm usually the person who makes everyone wait in line because I'm reading the whole paper in front of me. But you can't do that all the time, the way things move now. I have one other question for you, Chair Scott, and that is if she would yield again.
She will yield. Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Chair Scott, I had asked you in committee and since about the location privacy issue. And as I mentioned at the outset of my remarks here, this bill doesn't function unless the tech company knows where you are, because it only applies in Minnesota. And that is, in fact, built into the definition of account holder, that you have to be a resident of the state. So I want to ask you, I don't think it's in the bill, anything about that. I want to ask you your thinking about that, because obviously privacy for your location is a big, big deal. I mean, I personally try to shut off the location permissions whenever I can. We know that tech has ways of tracking you anyway, and so this is still a concern. This whole thing is based on big tech knowing where you are, where the child is. And so if you could respond to that, please.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Chair Libeling. My understanding would be, and I'm not a tech genius, but they would have to go by the IP address when someone is online. And I just want to say, too, that the bill does state that when it comes to the parental consent piece, that it has to be very prominent. So it can't be at the end of, in the midst of 10 pages of legalese that they have to read. It has to be very prominent for the parents to see and to understand. And I think, as I said, we tried to cover as much as we could. This is a good first step. I believe it's going to protect a lot of kids, and there may be some things going forward that we do want to add to tighten it up even more.
Representative Liebling.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Chair Scott. I hope you're right about that. I do think that, we certainly don't want to do nothing. We want to do something because the problem is a really serious problem. And so I appreciate that the bill is trying to do something, and also that when we do something like this, we almost always have to change it and tweak it as we go forward. No big new thing is ever perfect when it comes into being in its first iteration. So, I look forward to helping and seeing this tighten up and get better as time goes by, because I think that it is going to pass today. And I do think this shows that we shouldn't do nothing just because we can't do everything. But I do think it's important to go back to what Representative Greenman was saying before, that, we shouldn't feel too much comfort that we're going to try to protect kids against addictive features in tech, because we're not protecting them at all against the things that threaten them the most, and that is gun violence. Thank you.
I recognize a member from Meeker, Representative Gilman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Social media's business model is addicting our kids, and the current age limits, parental controls, screen time limits that social media companies hold out as solutions to protecting our kids are woefully ineffective. It is not working. I just talked to a resident doctor last night, and he talked about the mental health crisis. And again, we're seeing in our young people self-worth issues, ADD, ADHD on the rise, anxiousness, body dysmorphia, and an incessant need to buy things, from makeup to clothing, certain kinds of clothing, and they have drops on, when you can get it, and oh my gosh, Mom, you didn't set your alarm at this time of night to get this clothing, to buying specialty drinks, They've gotten very creative to feed that underdeveloped part of the brain, the frontal lobe. And I think back of when I was a child, the TV that we had was probably as wide as the desk that we have here. And I'll never forget, there were certain times that certain shows were on, but we had to have certain things done in our home in order to watch those shows. And if they weren't done, too bad. And this is from my single mom. And I'll never forget, one of my sisters, I will not say her name. I want to so bad because I could say it in the tone that my mom said. We actually had a bird, a myna bird. I'm gonna go just digress a little bit. This myna bird that we got to watch started picking up on things that the bird heard in our home, and would say her name the same way my mother would say her name. And so this is for my sweet sister. She proceeded to unplug that TV that was as big as the desk that we have here, take the TV out onto the front porch of our country home, and toss it out into the front yard. And again, it was over. It was done with. My sister has since written a song. It's called When I Was a Child. Then you could find the name of her. You could figure out her name. And it's so beautiful. But in her song, she talks about when I was a child, and we would be out in the cornfields for hours. We'd be out in the woods, and we'd have make-believe homes and, do things, probably climb up ladders and go on roofs that we shouldn't have done. But the adventures that we got to have, the experiences that we physically got to have and emotionally get to have, have just been a huge part of my life, and I'm so grateful. So the fights that parents have in Minnesota over these things, over iPads, and again, there is that piece that we want to protect our children. And we talked about this on the House floor tonight. Would we allow strangers into our home? But we are inviting them through these devices. So I have House File 22 that is tied up in state gov right now, currently, the Parental Bill of Rights. We want to equip our parents. We want to help them. We want to support them to be able to make decisions for their families. And again, we want healthier, happier children. And the things that are happening from the dopamine hits, from the images, from the things that they get to be a part of, even to us adults. And when we're hearing little beeps and noises and how we could be in the middle of a great conversation, but we're really not there. Even as adults, we're not even in the conversation because we hear the noise and our bodies are trained to listen and look. So again, I'm guilty of that as well. So I'm very, very grateful for House File 4138. I'm supportive of this. It's a step in the right direction. Again, I just think that we need to support our kids, support families in Minnesota, and I'm so grateful for this bill. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Bonner.
Thank you. So as we kind of get closer to voting on this bill today, I do want to say it's unfortunate that we didn't accept the piece about age. And I'm just briefly going to tell you what I didn't tell you earlier. I'm going to tell you about Coco and Zach, Trinity, Juliana Arnold, Carter Bremseth from Olivia, Minnesota, and about Gavin Guffey, the son of Representative Brandon Guffey of South Carolina, a conservative legislator out of South Carolina. These are names of kids who are not covered by this bill. These are the names of kids who are no longer with us. These are kids who died because they received pills or fentanyl-laced drugs from someone on a social media platform. They are kids who died of suicide because of sextortion. Representative Guffey is very, very open about talking about his son, Gavin, an incredible young man with a bright future ahead of him. He was 17. He was athletic. He was thoughtful. He was sweet. He began engaging with someone that he thought was a young girl. He sent her pictures, and granted, he probably should have known better, but that's the folly of youth. At 17, he thought he was interacting with a young girl, only to find out that the person on the other end was in fact not a young girl, but someone attempting to release compromising photos to his entire family and friends. Within hours, the issue escalated until he took his own life and was discovered dead on the bathroom floor on a July morning by his parents. But the story doesn't end there. It actually gets worse. 2 weeks after Gavin was buried, his parents got a comment with a laughing emoji. followed by a demand for money for the very photos that his son died over. The sextortionists didn't end their ploy with killing a 17-year-old boy. They didn't feel any remorse. They didn't feel bad. In fact, they actually went to the parents. Imagine that, members. Imagine you've lost your 17-year-old son. You've had to bury a bright young man and his future. And now you have someone trying to ask you for money so that they don't dishonor the memory of your child. He was 17. He would not be covered under the definition of this bill. And neither would Coco or Zach or Trinity or Juliana or Carter. So it's my hope that as we continue forward and we talk about what needs to be changed about this bill, that we have the courage to take on big tech, to take on other folks and say, no, not on our watch, so that kids like Gavin will be safe. And we know that in this, we talked about that playground that exposes things like eating disorders, cutting, depression, physical violence, accidental death, overdose, suicide, self-harm normalization, which the Mayo Clinic does a great deal on in depth here, and sextortion. We also know there are studies that show that under the age of 19, that heavy usage of social media increases the likelihood of depression, suicide, and death under the age of 19. So I think at some point we need to have an honest conversation about making sure that all of our kids are covered. And I want to say that I understand, and we'll talk to the bill at the end, but I want to say that my concerns remain from the beginning of this conversation about parents. And I understand why parents want to be involved in their kids' lives, and I encourage that. I think that's great. But I also think that we have to keep in mind that we are asking parents to become experts on technology, on the ways in which things like algorithms work, and all of those things in tech. And I will be honest, as a 30-year veteran of technology and someone who manages the teams who actually create the software, there are times when I don't fully understand the tech. I'm in the business. I work with the people who build the thing. And I don't always understand. And most parents are busy worrying about whether or not there's pudding cups and healthy snacks in the fridge for their kids and whether they've gone to swimming class and whatever. They shouldn't have to worry about whether we've ensured the protection of their kids online. That should be automatic. Period, the end. We talked a little bit about this idea of a potential of liability shields and whether or not that was considered in the bill. The national experts that deal with constitutional and regular law have not yet been able to get back to me on that question. I will tell you that while it hasn't been considered in this bill, it is in the Kids Code bill, a bill that's been vetted and tested in the courts and has responded and been changed and updated to reflect the changing environment and all of the legal precedent that has come before it. This bill is a new bill. And I'm not suggesting that it's not good. I'm just suggesting that it has never been vetted in any other state before. We will face challenges, and the reality is we will get sued. Now, that's not a reason to not do that today, and that's certainly not a reason to not take the first steps to protect kids. In fact, I would argue we should do it anyway. We should absolutely do whatever we have to do to take those first steps to protect kids. And as I said, many of the things in this bill came right out of the Kids Code bill. I support them. It's why I put my name on this bill. It's why I said I was willing to work with the authors. It's why I've said I've continued to be thoughtful about how we put this together, because frankly, protecting kids online in digital spaces, it's not a bipartisan issue. We all love our kids. We all care about where they are. But as this bill goes to the Senate, we need to be having deeper conversations about that liability and making sure that we are not, as Chair Libeling said, opening up an opportunity in which we've given big tech a shield from harming our kids, because we still haven't addressed the underlying root cause. The playground is still dangerous. And we're basically asking parents to give a permission slip to allow kids into a space that we know isn't fully safe. It was never designed for them, which is why we need to take the next step and pass the design code so that we can force tech companies to build better, safer products by design and by default that are created with kids in mind, that actually address and mitigate the harms of these products before the harm is done, before the next Gavin dies, before the next Coco and Zach and Trinity and Juliana and Carter. There is an entire law firm in this country right now who has a daily stand-up meeting every morning. And do you know what they discuss? They discuss all the cases that came in overnight about children who have died or been harmed by social media every day. Every single day. That's what they do. Parents get referred to them from all over the country, and they keep having these conversations, and we do see the courts are starting to turn the tide. But social media companies have long been given a pass on ensuring that their products are safe. We've given them liability protections in a way in which we do not give to any other industry in this country. But more importantly, we have given them the opportunity to put profit over children. And so as we talk about this today, we need to fix the tech issues so that we're not open to liability, and that this bill isn't going to go down because we can't enforce it. It does no good if we can't enforce it. We will get sued, but I damn well am ready to fight that fight alongside anyone else in this chamber when they come for us. I am more than willing to have that fight to extend that age to 18 so that those 17-year-olds like Gavin have a voice, that their parents have a remedy, because it's worth it. It's worth it. It is a self-righteous fight to have that conversation, and we should. But let us be cognizant as we think about taking these first steps. These are admirable goals set out in this bill. They are good first steps. But what I am going to say to all of you, including all of you on the other side of the aisle who are looking down right now and not looking at me, to keep in mind that next year we need to come back and we need to finish the job. Because I can tell you big tech is hoping we don't. They're hoping we don't pass that kids code or the stronger protections around algorithms. They're hoping we don't raise the age to 18 because right now they can profit off of those kids before they reach the age of consent. So when we vote for this bill today, if you choose to vote in the affirmative, I will expect to see each and every one of you sitting at the committee table next year helping finish the job. I'm not going to tell you which way to vote on this bill today, and you know I know it has challenges. But it's a step. It's a first step. Because this bill, I will end on this note, this is about protecting kids. This isn't a partisan issue. This is about something we all deeply care about, and most importantly, it's time that we tell big tech that we're going to protect kids and not their profits.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members, and thank you, Representative Scott, for bringing this bill. Like Representative Bonner, I have been working on this issue for at least 6 years. I have a different version of a social media bill. Mine was called SOTA Kids Act, Stop Online Targeting Against Our Kids. And this year it's HF 48. And my approach was a little bit different. It also went to age 18, which I share your views on. And it also really focused in on stopping the recommendation algorithms and focusing in on the publishing function of these social media platforms, because they're currently protected as publishers. And I think these recommendation algorithms go beyond that. And those addictive features are what are crushing our kids. But this bill is a fantastic step. And I'm so grateful to be able to vote for this. And it really does address a lot of the things Chair Liebling was talking about. The privacy settings are set by default at the most maximum privacy settings unless the parent opts to change that. So it is protecting all kids right from the beginning. And that is so important. I am very conservative on this issue because I've seen the harm. A lot of it is what Representative Bonner discussed. If anyone hasn't read the book, Anxious Generation, you should put on your reading list for this summer. Dr. Jonathan Haidt is the author, and he has a website that goes through all the research of social media harms in real time. It's constantly being updated. And it will break your heart how kids are driven into addiction and pornography and eating disorders and suicide ideation and self-harm and anxiety and depression. What these social media companies are doing to our kids and we are allowing is the biggest tragedy, the biggest crime against our kids I can imagine. So I'm so grateful, Chair Scott, for the work you have done on this, for bringing people together to see bipartisan support on this. And I hope this is the first of many steps that this body continues to take to protect our kids from the harm of social media. I am so proud to vote for this bill, and I will be cheering for you guys next year. Thank you.
I recognize a member from Olmsted, Representative Smith.
Thank you, Speaker. I kind of have two different speeches that I'm going to have to lump into this one because of the odd places that we went while we discussed this bill. First one, I just want to talk about what happened when we were talking about our amendments to this bill. When we're talking about guns in this space, we use the term common sense gun legislation. And the reason that, at least I will speak for myself, I like to use that term is to recognize that we are trying to find some common ground on that issue, that we can protect Second Amendment rights while also recognizing that there are dangers that guns present to our community that we want to make law to prevent. In our republic, no one's individual liberty is absolute. Everyone has the power or the freedom of speech, but we still have libel laws. Everyone has the freedom for religion, but it is still illegal to practice human sacrifice. We have limits on our freedoms to protect the society at large. And what we saw on one of our amendments is that an amendment that asked social media companies to report to the BCA in Minnesota potential threats, mass killing events, was okay for your caucus, until there was just a mention that something in those content would include guns. Being so committed to no legislation about guns to the point where you are having objections to Meta reporting to BCA when they see a potential mass shooting that could happen is simply unfathomable to me. But that's what we saw. And I hope Minnesotans see that on that issue, I really do believe your caucus is being not a reliable partner for Minnesotans in making it a safer place. And another reason that not taking up this Senate file is irresponsible. And I think we saw it in the most extreme case. Not even reporting if you see a gun, a picture of a gun and a potential threat. I don't understand. End of speech one. Let's talk about this bill, because I do believe this is a good bill. Members, we should pass this bill. It helps Minnesotan families. It helps Minnesotan children. And I think we haven't talked enough about what this bill is doing. We've talked a lot about what things that it isn't doing. And there's a lot of stuff that we would like to do that we're not doing here. But this bill is doing important things. Minnesotans under the age of 16 will no longer have addictive features on their social media feeds. And we define that very specifically in here. Infinite scrolling. Profile-based feed, meaning they're using other information to feed things to our kids. Push notifications, autoplay video, personal metrics, awards, and badges. All of those will no longer be a part of the experience of kids under 16 in our state. Think about your feeds right now. How much of your feed is that stuff? Metrics, like how many likes something is getting. Posts from people you don't even know, or groups you don't know, but they're pushing it towards you because it's seen that you liked other things. An autoplay video that catches your attention really quick, and so you watch 15 minutes of something dumb that you realize in 15 seconds you didn't want to watch. But you're addicted, you're wasting time, you're there. None of these things are going to be available for children now if we pass this bill. This is a big win. Privacy settings on children's accounts will be at the highest possible settings that these apps offer, and they cannot be changed. That is huge, because most of the highest privacy settings on things like Facebook means that people who aren't their immediate friends cannot see the content, cannot interact with them. That is huge for kids in our state. And this is a huge win for the data for those children. All children data under the age of 13 is not able in this bill to be sold, transferred, or disclosed in any way in perpetuity. Even when they become an adult, that company cannot use the data that they have collected during their time when they were children. This is a big win. It's not the whole game, but this is a really big win. Thank you for Representative Scott with working with me to get this in a place where I can make this speech. I wish members to vote yes on this.
I recognize the author of the bill, the member from Anoka, Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, members, for a really meaningful discussion on this bill. And I want to thank all the co-authors on the bill. I want to thank Representative Bonner for your expertise, and Representative Smith. It's been a pleasure working with you. And actually, Representative Stevenson, Leader Stevenson, has been an advocate for children's safety online as well. And so I want to thank, of course, my colleagues and all of you who have asked really good questions and helped to make the bill better. You had a handout of a list of the supporters of this bill, and I think it's such a wide variety of folks. I'll just read from top to bottom the list of signatories here. Enunciation Light Alliance, Division of Indian Work, Dr. Brian Nystrom, Minnesota Catholic Conference, Minnesota Family Council, thank you, Minnesota Indian Affairs Council, Minnesota Unplugged, SAVE, the Suicide Awareness Voices of Education, the Tech Exit, and With All. It's a really wide variety of folks that are supportive, and it's very gratifying. And as has been said, this is the first step. But I think just the fact, I think the thing that excites me the most about, well, there are two things, but one of them is just the design will be so much different for kids that will have social media accounts. And as was already been said, no more ads, no more push notifications, no more infinite scrolling. Remember when you used to be able to scroll to the bottom of your feed and that was it? That doesn't happen anymore for us or for kids. So, and the strongest privacy protections. This is a bill, the second thing that excites me about this bill is the empowering of parents. And I want to make it perfectly clear that this does not let parents off the hook, okay? Parents, this is your opportunity to really engage and in a simple way, really. They're going to make it pretty plain for you to understand how to do this and put through the verification. So I want parents to be on the alert. This is coming your way. And so I want to make that perfectly clear. I think Representative Engen shared with me a podcast, and I listened to it over the weekend, and it talked a lot about a particular platform and how it was just swarming with child predators. And that alone was motivation enough for me to have a bill like this. This one guy, he was a victim himself as a kid. Now he's 22 or 23, and he's telling about how he was groomed, and then all these different instances of these kids that are being taken advantage of that are missing. Some are missing because they've gone to meet these predators. So this bill is going to do a lot to protect our kids. And there's a lot more going forward that we can do. I think this is an excellent start, and I'm so gratified that it's such a bipartisan effort, that everyone in this chamber cares deeply about our kids and what they're exposed to, and we want the best lives for them, and I hope that we can garner a really strong green vote. Thank you, members.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will call the name of the member voting remotely.
Momani Hiltsley.
Momani Hiltsley, aye.
Momani Hiltsley votes aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 132 yeas and 2 nays, the bill is passed as amended and its title agreed to. There is a motion at the desk. The chief clerk will report the motion.
Niska moves that Senate file number 3210 be taken from the table.
I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That is my motion.
All those in favor of the motion to take Senate file 3210 from the table signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed say nay. The motion prevails. The chief clerk will report the bill.
Senate file number 3210, an act relating to human rights, including disability accommodations as protection from discrimination.
I recognize the author of the bill, the member from Olmsted, Representative Hicks.
Thank you so much, Speaker, and thank you everyone for hearing this bill today. I know we got a little bit of a preview yesterday, but I will just go through a little bit about what this bill does. This bill really sends a message to people with disabilities and to establishments across this state that it is not okay to discriminate against people with disabilities. It is not lawful to discriminate against people with disabilities, and that they must engage in a process to identify reasonable accommodations. And so with that, I believe we have an agreement on an amendment.
There is an amendment at the desk. The chief clerk will report the amendment.
Nadeau moves to amend Senate file number 3210, the first engrossment. The amendment is coded RA26-029.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Nadeau.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, members, and thank you, Representative Hicks, for bringing this and working with us on it, to keep this moving forward. This is, some people might think that this is not that important. Other people think it's, really important. And I happen to be one that thinks it's important to keep this discussion moving forward. And what the amendment does, members, is it adds, there's a couple of words, reasonable. So a reasonable accommodation, which mirrors the federal language for accommodations that are made for any and all people living with disabilities. And then it also, on page 2, line 7, it basically adds a statutory reference that Minnesota has for disabilities. That's the amendment, and I would recommend a green vote on this bill, members, or this amendment.
Further discussion on the amendment. I recognize a member from Olmsted, Representative Hicks.
Yes, that is the amendment, and we have reached an agreement that clarifies reasonable, which is already in law, and ensures that it's very clear who a person with a disability is. Please vote green.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor of the amendment, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. The motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There are no further amendments at the desk. The Chief Clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File Number 3210, as amended.
Third reading. Discussion. I recognize a member from Anoka, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Hicks. I agree with the message that we're trying to send. I'm sad to say I don't think that this bill still is good legislating and good legislation. So I do have a few questions for Representative Hicks so we can try to understand exactly what the bill does and doesn't do, if Representative Hicks will yield to a question.
She will yield, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Hicks. The process that is referenced in your bill, how does one in employment understand what the process is that is referenced in the bill?
Thank you so much for the question.
Representative Hicks.
Oh, I'm sorry. The process that is detailed in this bill, specifically on line 2.6, is the same, affirms the public policy and is not creating new or different process in any area of law, employment, housing, or public accommodations. The process that's detailed in 363A.08 and well-established case law is the process that's required for employment. The purpose of this bill in front of us today is that public policy for the state to secure persons in this state freedom from disability discrimination in all places.
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Hicks. I appreciate that answer, especially as it relates to 363.08 in the employment context. What about in 363A.10, if Representative Hicks will continue to yield? How does the bill affect the meaning of that provision?
She will yield. Representative Hicks.
I'm sorry, Representative Niska. Can you give me the statute one more time? I didn't write it down fast enough.
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Hicks. I'm asking about 363.10, entitled Real Property Disability Discrimination, which defines what reasonable modification or accommodations would be in the area of housing and real property.
Representative Hicks.
Thank you so much, Speaker, and thank you, Representative Niska. So I'm looking at subdivision 4, and I see what you are referencing, and I would just reiterate again that this bill, these 39 words, actually I think now with the addition of Representative Nadeau's amendment, we're up to like 56 words, but these 56 words would just require that when there are conversations around reasonable accommodations related to anything in this chapter, that a good faith effort to have that conversation needs to occur, or it may be considered discriminatory. So we're not touching this statute of law. It's still there.
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Hicks. Appreciate that answer. With respect to 363A.11, does your bill change the meaning of that provision? That's the provision that discusses discrimination in the area of public accommodations. Are any of the specific prohibitions in that changed by the meaning of your bill?
She will continue to yield. Representative Hicks.
Thank you. Again, this bill is in the public policy section and requires that individuals engage in an accommodations process in good faith, and if they do not, it may be considered discriminatory.
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Hicks. You gave a more clear answer with respect to the other provisions than you did with respect to point 11. Does your bill, if it's adopted as amended, change the meaning of any process required under 363A.11, if Representative Hicks will yield?
She will yield. Representative Hicks.
Thank you so much. And again, thank you, Representative Niska. I would just like to reiterate that this is in the beginning of this chapter of law around public policy, and it says that if an entity does not engage in a reasonable accommodation per Representative Nadeau's bill, that it may be considered discriminatory. The chapters of law that we are apparently going through point by point are impacted in the broader sense that reasonable accommodations will need to be a part of that conversation, and if it is not, then it may be considered discriminatory. And we can, I have the whole chapter of law. We can go through every subdivision if you want to, but I frankly do not understand. The answer is the same for each subdivision because we are not touching those subdivisions separately. Additionally, I want to reground us back to this is about discrimination against people with disabilities. This is now with Representative Nadeau's amendment 57 words, I think. I'd have to double count that. Maybe Representative Nadeau can count it for me. We were at 39 before your additions. It is now a handful of words in law that say that all entities must engage in that process. And individuals with disabilities have asked us to do this. Individuals with disabilities are here today. Individuals with disabilities and the Disability Law Center have all testified. And we have worked in good faith to come up with an amendment that ensures that it's reasonable and ensures that it is specific to disabilities. And so I would respectfully request that we get to the heart of this issue and not go line by line through this chapter because the answer is not going to change.
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Hicks. I think we are getting to the heart of what your bill does, and in particular, I'm concerned that you're not willing to answer a question about 363A.11, which is about the public accommodations discrimination. That's an area that we have, in particular in Minnesota, had very serious litigation problems about, we've had a series of very serious problems with shakedown litigation. We talked about, I mentioned this yesterday, that this body had to amend the Minnesotans with Disabilities provision to deal with public accommodation discrimination problems. And so with respect to 363A.11, I'm particularly concerned that you're not offering me the same answer you had offered before. We have in your bill as amended, again, getting to the heart of what your bill says, it references a process to determine, I believe, whether if a reasonable accommodation is now the amended language, and it references public accommodation. So every store, every bowling alley, anyone who opens their business to the public now has to be willing to engage in a process for public accommodation. And so I'm just trying to understand, what is the process that someone who owns such a business, a public accommodation, what is the process that person is supposed to go through if your bill passes into law? What is the process that's referenced in line 2.6, and how does one understand what that process is if Representative Hicks will yield?
She will yield. Representative Hicks.
Thank you so much. And just to clarify for the record, I do believe I answered the question, but I'll try one more time. This is in the public policy section and requires entities to engage in a conversation about reasonable accommodations. So the part of the bill that you are, or the part of the Human Rights Act that you are referencing, 363A.11, that already talks about disability discrimination, that we did modify because there was some concerns, will still remain as strong as it was prior to this. And now we've added in public policy. And thank you to Representative Nadeau, we've added the word reasonable. So I think when we put all of those pieces together, what we have in front of us is an opportunity to show people with disabilities in this state that they cannot and will not be discriminated against. And when they work in good faith with individuals who own public accommodations to find a reasonable accommodation, that will be protected in law. And so if that does not occur, there will be an opportunity to make sure that folks are not discriminated against. So I think I've answered it now. I'm happy to discuss that further if I'm incorrect, but I think I have answered that.
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Representative Hicks. I think you said that it doesn't change the meaning of point 11. I hope that's the answer to it. If we are amending point 11, I think as a legislature we should be forthright about that and actually amend the language of point 11. Same question with respect to 363A.12 regarding public services. Your bill references public services. Is 363A.12 changed in any way, the meaning of 363A.12 changed in any way by your bill, if Representative Hicks will yield?
She will yield. Representative Hicks.
Thank you so much, Speaker. Thank you, Representative Niska. As previously stated, this 57 words is in the public policy portion of this bill and relates to the chapter of law to ensure that reasonable accommodation conversation occurs in all areas of life for people with disabilities. That will include 36.A12. It will include 36.A13. I mean, like, are we going to go through page by page? Because the answer does not change, because this, and I'm not a lawyer, but I did write a lot of statute in previous roles. And so when the first part of a statute that directs how the rest of the chapter of law is applied is amended, all of the parts of the chapter of law following that are part of that conversation. So that's what I've done. And so the answer is the same. It would require that the entities described in 363.12 engage in a conversation about reasonable accommodations for people with disabilities.
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Hicks, for that answer. I guess I am disappointed to hear that it seems to be changing. It should have been a pretty simple yes or no question that we are amending or we're not amending different portions of, or changing the meaning of different provisions. It sounded like you said with respect to employment that we're not changing the meaning of that provision. With respect to this, you said when we change something in the public policy provision of the statute, all of the parts are part of that conversation. I think that means that all of the parts of the Minnesota Human Rights Act with respect to disability discrimination now have a changed meaning, and we don't have clarity about what that changed meaning is. We don't have clarity about what the process is that will be required in each one of those particular areas. We have clarity in our statutes in 363A.08 about what the process is that is required with respect to employment. I think if we want to take portions of that process and put it into other places in the statute, we should be forthright with the people of Minnesota, with the public accommodations of Minnesota, with the educational institutions of Minnesota, with the disabled community of Minnesota about exactly what that process is and is not. The concern that I have is that all we're doing really in this bill is inviting lawyers to make arguments in court cases about what a process would be, and that's going to create a lot of potential problems. It's going to create a lot of potential problems in the area of education. Our educational institutions are not going to know exactly what the process is that is required unless and until they have a case brought against them. That case is litigated. If they can afford to litigate that case to a verdict, a district court judge will then tell them about whether or not that process they followed applies. Then they will have to go eventually up to the Minnesota Supreme Court. Perhaps the Minnesota Supreme Court will provide some clarity about what that process is. Is that process in other contexts the same as 363.08, or is it not? Is it somehow different? Again, we should be saying that as legislators. We did that job when we amended 363.08, when there was a question about whether the interactive process applied in the employment context or not. That's our job as a legislative branch, to look at that process language, to amend, to offer specific prescriptions to people, clarity to people, and write that into the statutes. What we have here instead is a backdoor effort to change the meaning of some of those provisions through the public policy section, through inviting lawyers to bring cases, to litigate those cases. Members, this bill, I appreciate Representative Nadeau's efforts to make this better. He did make this a little tiny bit better. It is still far from ready. It is still far from the work that we need to do, not just for those who, businesses or schools or other folks who might be affected, but for the very disabled folks that we're trying to help and protect. Inviting people to make lawsuits, inviting people to get involved in litigation does not help anybody other than lawyers, other than judges who now have more power. Lawyers have more opportunity, more work to do. The bill before us today simply isn't the solution to the problem. It frankly creates potential ambiguity, I think, as regards to employment that weakens the protections for disabled people, and in other areas is just abdicating our legislative responsibility to the judicial branch. So members, I'll be a no.
I recognize the member from Clay, Representative Joy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will Representative Hicks yield for a question?
She will yield. Representative Joy.
Representative Hicks, since I own a gas station, what process will I have to change if this becomes law to enact at my gas station?
Representative Hicks.
Thank you, Speaker. You will have to have a conversation about individuals who are requesting reasonable accommodations. So I would assume that you already probably do this because we've served together and I've seen you in human services, and so I know you have a heart for people. So if someone comes to your gas station and can't get out of their car, right? I assume that you probably have a little sign on your gas pump that tells them they can call and someone will help them. And maybe if you don't, that is the process that you should engage in, right? It's to meet that need. And I believe that most Minnesotans and most business owners, you probably do want to do that. You probably already do that, right? And so if there's a reasonable accommodation that you need to provide, you'd have a conversation with someone about, hey, how can I help you here, right? And if they say, could someone help me pump my gas? I can't imagine you'd say no, right? So that's it. It's that simple. It is, by the way, we did count. It is 46 words. So that's all. It is being a decent human. It's making sure people with disabilities are able to have a conversation to make sure they can participate fully in our community. That's it.
Representative Joy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I didn't really get clarification, but I do accommodate things at my store like this. But this just seems like it's opened me up for litigation. It doesn't answer like this is going to be more money to my attorney for retainers, just trying to figure out the process of this, of how this is all going to work. We're taking care of our customers now. We're doing what we need to do now. I have people with disabilities that work for me right now. And so to me, the question is you're going to have to put stickers on your pumps. You're going to have to accommodate for this. Now it's going to be a law that's going to be opened up that I could end up in litigation, more expense on a business, which raises the cost. As we continue hearing about mandates and what's going through, this is concerns I have as a business owner right now in Minnesota. And we continue to add these, and we're wondering why costs are going up and why we continue to do this. It's because of these unknown questions we have. You know, does the cooler door open wide enough? Are the shelves wide enough? Where's it gonna end? I mean, we have a lot of things coming through, but there's no real process here that spells it out. It's just gonna be, like we've heard many times, the lawyers taking my money and litigating this, and I'm gonna have to defend myself. I mean, this to me is just another mandate to businesses. And I think this needs a lot of work before we move forward, because the answer's not here. I just can't put my finger on it right now when I look at this, what's moving through the House today. And I appreciate the passion, I do, and I understand that. And us as employers, we welcome everybody. We try to do. We have people that pull up that can't pump their own gas. You know, Minnesota used to not allow you to pump your gas, and now they do. But we accommodate for that. I don't need St. Paul, Minnesota telling me to do that. I don't need a process put in play that lawyers can go play politics over and come after businesses on this. We do not need that. I think this bill's moving too fast. I think it should slow down, but that's, I guess, Mr. Speaker, thank you.
I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Finke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I just wanted to let the representative know that accommodating people with disabilities is not a mandate from St. Paul. It is the federal law. It is state law. We are not asking people to do something that is either unreasonable or not already in the law. You have to accommodate your employees. And the problem with saying what is the process, let's put the process into law, is that every individual with disabilities will require a unique experience in that process, because everybody doesn't need the same accommodations, and every human person doesn't interact the same way with requesting accommodations in the world. So I think the little game about, like, let's explain exactly what the process is when it comes to requesting disability accommodations, I mean, in Minnesota, but just anywhere in this country, is that process is a nightmare. We are trying to make sure that the power dynamic and the power differential is recognized, because people need accommodations, and usually they are denied. Just usually they're denied. Every person has a unique need for their accommodations. The process is you engaging in a good faith way, whether you own a gas station or any other business. There is no what about my version of business when it comes to not accommodating people with disabilities. It's a good bill. Thank you, Representative Hicks. Thank you to everyone whoever worked in the backroom negotiations to avoid the Human Rights Act wormhole. I'm very grateful to you. I think that we are passing some good law here, and we should all vote green.
I recognize a member from Ramsey, Representative Lugar-Nicolai.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I rise in support of this bill. This is a good bill. It remains a good bill. It was a good bill yesterday. It is an even better bill with the help of Representative Nadeau. Good job. Some of the comments that I have heard today have concerned me. As an attorney, I feel attacked personally, professionally, in every way imaginable. It's hard, and I hope that everybody takes pity on me. But actually, I will say in all seriousness, oftentimes when I hear hostility to the work of plaintiffs' attorneys, individuals who are really helping other people navigate their rights in a system that isn't always helpful to them, rights that exist because we weren't respecting them previously, I hear hostility to those people being helped, not to the lawyers. I'm overhead, folks. I won't get a cut. Doesn't matter. I'll be working with people irrespective of whether or not this law passes, and I will not get 33%. Some of my friends will. But the work that they do is important because it helps people navigate rights that they may not be able to navigate on their own, much like people who are mechanics help me navigate my car. It is work that is important because it underscores the importance of the laws that we pass and the supports that we create for individuals who otherwise wouldn't have access. This law helps to reinforce existing law, which requires accommodations in public access, at the gas station, at the movie theater, in schools, in hospitals, in employment. And these laws all state that access including for disabled persons, that it must occur. I'm just looking at point 12, 363A.12, which we were previously speaking about, fail to ensure physical and program access for disabled persons. What this law requires is a conversation. The interactive process is not rocket science. It is not integral calculus. It is not anything particularly difficult. It is one person standing up and saying, I have trouble accessing this service, this job, this educational facility. Can you help me? Sometimes the employer says, is that accurate? Do you actually have trouble? Do you have a physical limitation, or is there anything really wrong here? So then the conversation proceeds to some sharing of information. And then at the end, either there is an accommodation because it is possible, or at times, sometimes the employer says, or the place of accommodation says, I can't do this. It's an undue hardship. That's also built into our law already. This reinforces the work and helps to provide support to the Minnesota Department of Human Rights in performing that work. But these things exist in statute. They are important. They exist for a reason, and this process will not be particularly obscure or difficult for any person who is willing to participate in capitalism to navigate. You do way harder things on a daily basis. So I strongly urge a green vote on this.
I recognize the member from Sibley, Representative Harder.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This has been an interesting conversation, and I'm just trying to understand what are we trying to solve with this bill. For many years, I worked with individuals who were disabled. They could have been blind, in a wheelchair, developmentally disabled. I worked, it was called a job coach, which means I worked with people in a business, working to make accommodations. I worked with people in a workshop at home, and we always made accommodations for people that were disabled. And so I'm just speaking from experience, from working with those that are disabled. I'm just wondering what are we lacking that we aren't doing now that's already in law. So I'm having a hard time to support this bill today because having, like I said, worked in the field, and we always try to do reasonable accommodations for everyone that came through the door that we worked with. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Feist.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to rise as one of the people on my side of the aisle who is an employer. I have been an employer for almost 16 years now because I am old somehow. But I am really grateful to Representative Hicks for bringing this bill. Over the time that I have employed people, we have provided accommodations, and that has enabled my team to be benefited from just a diversity of talent over the years, and I'm really grateful. So, you know, when we as employers do right by our employees, that comes to benefit us, and nobody sues us, and all of those things are good. So I just wanted to rise to say that, you know, as an employer in the state of Minnesota, I think this is great and important protections, and I thank you, Representative Hicks. Thanks.
I recognize a member from Anoka, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and members, thank you for the discussion. One of two things has to be true. Either this bill does nothing, in which case we're just kind of doing some vibes here, messaging. I appreciate the message. I do agree with the message. Or it does something. And the concern that I have, especially given Representative Lugar-Nicolai's speech today, is that I'm not sure that we're getting a very clear answer about whether it does nothing or does something. Representative Lugar-Nicolai yesterday said that we should calendar this bill so that we would establish a process in the other portions of the Minnesota Human Rights Act other than .08, because .08 is the only one that sets out an interactive process. And today, she just said that these things already exist in statute, and so there's nothing really to worry about. So, Mr. Speaker, if Representative Lugar-Nicolai would yield for a question.
She'll yield. Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Lugar-Nicolai will this bill change anything about the legal rights of any disabled person in Minnesota and the process that needs to be followed with respect to their exercise of their legal rights?
Representative Lugar-Nicolai.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Representative Niska, thank you for the question. The answer is that it will change the practice of the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. These laws already confer an obligation on our employers, our public institutions, our schools, to make access available to individuals with disabilities. The interactive process is spelled out specifically in 363A.08, which is the employment section. It is not referenced specifically elsewhere. However, how you determine whether or not a decision to accommodate or what the accommodation is sometimes something that we work back from in assessing the process by which you reached that. So if someone dug their heels in and refused to do something, and there was no real discussion, an impasse seemed to occur very early on, that would potentially demonstrate a lack of intent to accommodate or to provide a reasonable accommodation. So I think it's important to have the value of the interactive process referenced in our public policy section, because that provides a lens for the Department of Human Rights to assess how a process went down, whether or not it was indeed sufficiently protective of the rights of the individual who's seeking access to a service, a place of employment, or a school. Hope that helps.
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Lugar-Nicolai. It actually makes it more confusing because I don't see anywhere in the Minnesota Human Rights Act that the Minnesota Department of Human Rights is limited from fully enforcing all of the prohibitions within the Minnesota Human Rights Act and has to be directed to do so by some provision in the public policy section. But I do think Representative Nicolai said this bill actually does nothing, which I think is true, actually. I hope that it's true. I hope that Minnesota courts don't think that we are somehow amending the actual operative provisions of the Minnesota Human Rights Act, which is quite robust. I think that, I think a lot of folks in the disability community have been, frankly, misled by the need for this bill, by some sort of concern that the Minnesota Human Rights Act does not have extremely robust protections for disabled folks, which I support. I would have a hard time if there was someone bringing a bill that would water down in any way the protections of the Minnesota Human Rights Act. But what we're doing here is we're taking a may, we're adding a may in an area where an employment, it already says shall, that the interactive process has to be applied. We're suggesting a process that isn't clarified, that will result in some plaintiffs' lawyers, some creative plaintiffs' lawyers attempting to potentially create law in other areas. Maybe the Minnesota Department of Human Rights will try to create law in other areas. To tell Representative Joy that on his gas station on Highway 10, for example, that he needs to have some additional process that he is currently unaware of about what he's supposed to do with the tens of thousands of people who travel up Highway 10 and happen to go to his gas station. I hope that what we've heard today, which is essentially that this bill does nothing, is in fact true. I worry that what we are doing instead is opening up the door for the judicial branch to step into what should be our role, to define what the terms in 363A.08 through 363A.19 mean in a whole bunch of contexts that we as the legislative branch should be doing. And it is not, in fact, silly games for us in our job to talk about what the words are that we're putting into statutes and what they mean and how they play out in real life. That is, in fact, the job that the people of Minnesota have elected us to do. That is our job as the closest branch of government to the people to make those laws, to answer to the public for those laws. This bill, frankly, just isn't ready. It's either not necessary, it doesn't do anything, or it does things that the proponents of it are not fully either aware of or willing to own up to. So members, please vote no.
I recognize a member from Hennepin, Representative Nadeau.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, members. And I wasn't going to stand and talk again, but I hope, I have a lot of respect for everybody in this room, and I hope that Representative Niska's fears are not as bad as I hope that that's not the case. It's interesting when, you know, some of you may know that I do some work with people living with disabilities and employment services. And I'll tell you, you go into some of these businesses and the people that are there that are working, they're making, you know, those employers at Ruan and those other places, they are making those accommodations for people who want to work in community so that they can be out there. And there's intrinsic value, and I've talked about that before, you know, that there's intrinsic value in work, and it's especially important for, you know, some of the people that we live with and we live around, and there are brothers and our sisters and you know, nieces and nephews, and having a process that's put in place where there's the opportunity for employers to have should there be more guidance? Sure, maybe there should be more guidance, and maybe that's what the Department of Human Rights will do. Most employers that I know that are employing people with disabilities, they love it. They want them there. They want to provide the opportunity for people to work in those environments, and it's not egregious, and it's incredibly beneficial to the rest of the workforce that are working alongside these folks as well. And so I support this, and I know that people are going to vote their district and vote their hearts, and I think that's great. And like I say, I hope that the fears that we have are not going to be true, and I don't think that Representative Joy, I don't think you're going to have to change anything because the laws are already fairly clear with the accommodations and the accessibility that you need to provide with your employees now. So, Mr. Speaker and members, thank you.
I recognize the author of the bill, the member from Olmsted, Representative Hicks.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for the conversation today. And I do just want to say, I wish that the experience of what Representative Nadeau shared and what others have shared that they've witnessed for Representative Engen with his friend Josh yesterday, I wish that was the experience of all people with disabilities. I wish it was. But the truth is, it isn't. The truth is, the most complaints that the Department of Human Rights receives is people with disabilities. The truth is that disability doesn't care about how much money you have. It doesn't care about where you live. It doesn't care about anything else. Anyone in this room could have a disability, and we maybe would or wouldn't know. You could all become people with disabilities today, right? You could have a stroke tonight. You could get cancer tomorrow. Anyone can become a person with a disability. And until you're in that space, until you've experienced what that's like, it might seem like putting a sticker on a gas station pump is a bigger deal than helping the person with a spinal cord injury pump their gas. It might seem like that. But if you have a spinal cord injury and you can't get out and pump your gas, the fact that Representative Joy has a sticker on his gas pump with the phone number to the gas station so you can still put gas in your car feels like you're really being included in your community. It feels like you matter. It means that you count. And in Minnesota, I believe that we do think that people with disabilities count. I do think that Minnesotans want all people to be included in their community. I do think that most people in this room probably have someone they love very, very deeply who has a disability. And I would imagine if you have someone you love very, very deeply who has a disability, you've also heard frustrations from them about how hard it is sometimes to navigate the world and how challenging it can be to just be. And people with disabilities want and deserve to be part of our community. They want and deserve to feel like they matter. And nothing in this bill does some of the scary things that were mentioned. We're not inviting lawsuits. That's not what we're doing. We added the word reasonable. We're inviting people with disabilities to be able to fully participate in public and private spaces in this state. We're not changing the meaning. What we're doing is emphasizing that when a reasonable accommodation is requested, there needs to be a conversation. Just a conversation. But it can be really easy to shut that conversation down before having it because it's inconvenient, because it's hard, because frankly, we're all busy and we have busy lives, and it's easy to ignore our most vulnerable. But it's not right, and it's not what we should do. And what this bill does is make that easier, makes that conversation easier, and ensures that people with disabilities are able to be a part of our communities. If cost is unreasonable, if stickers are unreasonable, then that's a conversation too. We added the word reasonable. No one is trying to create the Wild West of lawyers. What we're trying to create is an inclusive state. What we're trying to say is that reasonable people can have a reasonable conversation about reasonable accommodations. And together, we can create a Minnesota where everyone feels seen and heard and included. I do want to just address one last thing, and that is this obsession with the word process. It is a person-centered, individual, informed process. This legislature could decide to mandate that process, but what do we do if someone's non-speaking and uses a Dynavox to communicate? What do we do if we set out a process that doesn't account for some individual need? Then are we really being person-centered? Are we really abiding by what we think our values are? The whole point of this is to be person-centered. The whole point of this is to ensure that we are centering people with disabilities and that we are creating an inclusive and equitable space. So with that, members, I would like to ask you to vote green. And I'd like you to vote green for your neighbors who have disabilities, and I'd like you to vote green for your kids if you have kids with disabilities. I'd like you to vote green for the folks at your church or your faith community. And I'd like you to vote green for all Minnesotans, because disability can happen any day to anybody without warning. And if it hasn't touched your family yet, if you haven't had someone who's experienced this, if you don't have a child on an IEP, or you haven't had a family member who's had a stroke, then maybe you haven't gotten to experience this yet. But you will. And when you do, you'll know that you contributed to making this state more inclusive. You contributed to making sure that folks with disabilities feel heard, seen, and are protected in the state of Minnesota. Vote green.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. Members, please vote. The clerk will call the names of the members voting remotely.
Momani Hiltsley.
Momani Hiltsley, aye.
Momani Hiltsley votes aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 88 yeas and 42 nays, the bill is passed as amended and its title agreed to. Messages from the Senate.
Message from the Senate, Madam Speaker. I hereby announce that the Senate has concurred in and adopted the report of the Conference Committee on Senate File Number 4060, a bill relating to public safety. The Senate has repassed said bill in accordance with the recommendation report of the Conference Committee. The message is signed Thomas S. Bodern, Secretary of the Senate. Novotny moves that the report of the Conference Committee on Senate File Number 4760 be adopted and that the bill be repassed as amended by the Conference Committee.
I recognize a member from Sherburne, Representative Novotny.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As said, we did come to a Conference Committee agreement. Things that were dropped from the bill were things that were already passed. I believe there was 9 of those that were already passed, and those will be going to the floor. We did some pulling of things from the fiscal or budget bill that ended up not having a cost. And for all that, these are all bills that we've heard on the floor, and I recommend a green vote.
Any discussion on the Conference Committee report? I recognize a member from Anoka, Representative West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In this particular conference report, I am sad to see that the ban on prediction markets was not removed in conference. It really should have been, and I would urge members to send this back so we can correct that, because without that, I could not support the conference report.
I recognize a member from Ramsey, Representative Moeller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is a great bill. All of it is a great bill, and I recommend a motion that we vote yes on the motion to concur.
I recognize a member from Ramsey, Representative Feist.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to say a few words in support of the Conference Committee report. I heard we have some time, so some of this is just going to be me complaining. Sorry. First, I wanted to say that I'm really grateful that we included a provision that will extend the ability of Ramsey County to spend funds that we allocated in 2023 for what's called dual status or crossover youth. This is children who are simultaneously impacted by the juvenile justice and the child welfare systems. We know that these are particularly challenging group of kids, and there are some really specific ways that we can support them, and in doing so, protect public safety. I was very frustrated that we allocated these funds in 2023, $2 million specifically, and I found out this year that the Department of Public Safety just didn't bother to spend $1 million that we had allocated. And that was really frustrating because a lot of people talk about these children and what we need to do for them. And then we answered that call, and the Department of Public Safety did not do their part. And then in addition, for Ramsey County, which received this grant, they listed the wrong due date for spending those funds in both the RFP and the grant award. So we are just correcting that and giving Ramsey County until December 15th to spend those dollars. I also wanted to lift up the portion of this bill that relates to the Department of Corrections facilities licensing. I think this is a really important provision. It's going to just create more uniformity across the different types of facilities across the state of Minnesota. It also creates some sanctions. And at the conference committee, it was all public safety folks, but we have some DHS human services folks here too. So I just wanted to mention that there was a recently really horrible report of a 13-year-old child who was in a facility licensed by DHS, who was abused, who was exposed to pornography, who was exposed to drugs. This should not happen in our state. And so I'm really glad that we're doing something in the Department of Corrections context. And I really hope that DHS is going to follow suit and make sure that any person who is in our care in a secure facility in the state of Minnesota will have the protections that they need. And lastly, I just wanted to complain one more time about the fact that my awesome reverse warrants bill, which passed the Senate, was not included in this conference committee report. This is a bipartisan bill, both in the House and the Senate. It prohibits 2 types of reverse warrants. One of them is geolocation warrants, so where something happens, and then the law enforcement just says that they want to know who all was in an X-mile radius of that event. And in doing so, they are surveilling a lot of private law-abiding citizens. The other type of reverse warrant is keyword warrants. So, for example, there was an incident where a hit and run occurred, and everybody who Googled the word hit and run in that general location was swept up into government surveillance. And again, this is like both not an effective law enforcement tool. Data shows that we don't find the bad guy more often when we use these types of warrants, which are increasing exponentially in Minnesota and across the country. They also are hopefully very unconstitutional. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which our United States Supreme Court really loves, found these types of warrants unconstitutional. And what that means is that if we have a conviction in the state of Minnesota that is based on one of these reverse warrants, that conviction could be overturned, and that's really problematic. And that actually did happen recently in a Minnesota Supreme Court decision here in the state of Minnesota. So hopefully my colleagues on both sides of the aisle who are going to be here next term will carry this effort forward. I think it's really important, and so I was excited. We might be like the first state that passed this in any body, so go Senate. Ooh, I'm not supposed to even mention the other body. But anyway, I was glad to see some traction this year. I appreciate my colleagues on the other side of the aisle who absolutely hate my bill. So Representative Duran and Representative Steer, I appreciated our conversation, even though it went very, very badly and we didn't get anywhere, but thank you. So with that, I would encourage members to vote green on this bill.
All right, members, I'd like to kind of lay out the path here because I think we're getting off track. Right now, the motion is the adoption of the conference committee report. And then if we adopt it, then we will give it its third reading, and then we will have our third reading speeches. So I have a list of individuals, and I don't know if they want to talk on the motion or if they want to talk on the third reading. So if you would like to talk on the motion, please stand now and be recognized. Okay. I'm going to take that as a seeing no further discussion. All those in favor of the motion to adopt the conference committee report, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Nay. The motion prevails. Now, the chief clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File Number 4760, as amended by conference.
Third reading, as amended by conference. Is there any discussion to the bill? I recognize the member from St. Louis, Representative Johnson P.
Thank you, Speaker. Members, I'm just going to talk about one of the portions that did come through that conference committee report. It has to do with firefighter cancer being classified in the future as a line of duty death for those firefighters that contract that job-related cancer and end up dying. This conversation has started quite a while ago in different areas and for different reasons. But over the course of time, when you look at the fire service, there's a lot of things that we've done that have killed a lot of firefighters. And, you know, when you look back in history, we started with what we called tailboarders, right? They were our modern day, what we call firefighters today. We called them tailboarders because they actually rode on the tailboards of the trucks. And they would get thrown off, they would get run over, they would get killed. So we made changes. We made trucks that actually had cabs that they could ride inside in, so we would stop killing firefighters that way. But when we did that, we also acknowledged those deaths as being caused in the line of duty and got the recognition and benefit of that happening. So you fast forward a little bit in the fire service, and firefighters were dying in fires. They were going in further in the smoke, inhaling the smoke, all those types of things, getting burned, not having the right equipment, so we developed SCBAs. We developed turnout gear to protect those firefighters, not just protect their bodies, but to protect their lungs as they went into these fires to do their jobs. But those firefighters that died because of those things, being caught in a fire and not having the right equipment, we recognized as line of duty deaths as well. And then, you know, it became more evident that more firefighters were dying on scenes from heart attacks or strokes or cardiovascular events. A lot of things go into play there, stress, sleep deprivation, all that kind of stuff. But we recognized that when a firefighter dies of a heart attack, it's a line of duty death if it happens within a certain window and a certain time. But we also made changes. We've made investments in how we wake firefighters up, how we dispatch our firefighters, things to protect that cardiovascular and heart health. Then we're starting to realize that PTSD is having a major role in what's killing our firefighters. I've got a number of friends over the years in this business that have died by suicide. And we realize that it's part of the things that comes with the job, with those exposures and things like that. So we've done things to improve that and get help and remove that stigma and all those things that go with it. But we also recognize those deaths as line of duty deaths, which brings us to cancer. More and more firefighters are dying of job-related cancer. And we know that. This body, a number of years ago, passed a law to ban flame retardants. Because at the time, we thought that those cancers were being caused by exposure from the different chemicals, from the smoke, from all the other things that firefighters are exposed to on those calls. And the Minnesota legislature at the time had one of the strongest flame retardant bans in the country, and that saved firefighters' lives. It improved their outcomes. We've had grants over the years to fund special washers to wash firefighters' gear so they don't continue to get exposed to those carcinogens over and over and over again every time they put on their gear, every time they get in the truck. We've funded things to basically exhaust systems to pull the diesel exhaust out of the station because we realized that the particulates from that diesel exhaust was also causing cancer to our firefighters. And one of the final things we did a couple years ago was a ban on PFAS. We're realizing that the PFAS that's in our turnout gear and in the foam that we had been using is one of the major drivers of those cancers that our firefighters are getting. And with all of that, we've recognized the problem and we've made changes to try and reduce it, but what we haven't done to this point is recognize those deaths as line of duty deaths, like we have for all these other things over the course of time. I was at the fire station a couple years back when we were having this conversation, and a retiree came in. He had retired shortly after I got hired, but he had put in quite a bit of time. He came in, he was talking to us, he said he had just gotten diagnosed with prostate cancer and was going through treatment for that. And he pulled up, he had put this list together of a fire that they were on. It was a chemical fire, and he listed all the firefighters that were on scene with him. And behind every firefighter's names was at least 1 or 2 or 3 cancers that those firefighters had developed over the course of time after that fire. So this is a very real thing. And we have an opportunity here in Minnesota to acknowledge that. The federal government, through all of its dysfunction, Congress passed the Honor Our Fallen Heroes Act in December of this year to make firefighter cancer deaths eligible for the federal line of duty death benefits, which is a huge deal. It's one of the most impactful pieces of legislation that firefighters have seen at the federal level in my lifetime. We have the opportunity here in Minnesota to show that we are more functional or as functional as the federal government, which is a fairly low bar. But with that, there is still work to be done, right? I mean, it's great that we recognize it, but it would be even better if we just had less firefighters dying. Things like improving our gear. The gear that when I get done here, when we close out a session, when I go back to work, the gear that I put on is covered in PFAS, and every time I put it on, I get re-exposed over and over again. And the reality is there's no gear out there that doesn't do that at this point. So pushing for things like that so that we can not have our firefighters exposed, figuring out sleep deprivation. When you look at a lot of those things that kill firefighters, one of the major causes in each one of those things, whether it's PTSD, whether it's cardiovascular disease, cancer, all that type of stuff, is sleep deprivation. Reducing exposures to carcinogens to make sure that we are doing everything that we can so our firefighters are not continuing to get exposed. And the final piece, and a huge thank you to Representative Keeler. She's been working with her firefighters up there in Moorhead about getting cancer screenings. Right now, we know that firefighters have higher risks of cancer. We know that we have all these exposures. We know we have all these risk factors. I think last time I talked about this bill, we talked about the fact that it is a group 1 carcinogen. It is labeled and grouped with some of the most cancer-causing elements in our society. So having screenings where firefighters can get a more advanced screening, more often, more in depth, without it having to come out of their pockets, with it being part of what we get, maybe we catch some of those things earlier so we don't have more and more people getting this benefit. So when I close here, today we have an opportunity, and I'd encourage you to vote yes on this bill, because we have an opportunity to tell all those firefighters and those families that because of their sacrifice and they're willing to commit to their communities, we'll have their backs if the worst thing happens. Just like we have their backs if they fall through a floor, just like we have their backs if they get caught in a flashover, just like we have their backs if they get in a car wreck. With cancer, we have the opportunity to tell them we have their backs, and this is some of the most impactful stuff for every firefighter in your communities, so I'd encourage a green vote. Thank you.
I recognize a member from Beltrami, Representative Duran.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise with a little bit of concern with this bill. One, because of the fact that my bill was ripped out of it, which would have been the police officer personal information data, and would have helped out the correction officers as well. There's some huge concerns with that. One, because it would have helped out a lot of our people that are helping out our community and protecting them, making sure that they were safe. I'm really concerned that we added more protections for judges, but we didn't add any protections for our peace officers. That is a concern. So there are some good things in this bill. There are some other concerns with this bill as well. I'm not sure how this is going to be viewed when we're giving more protections for their data and privacy for judges, but refuse to actually add this to the bill for peace officers. There is a time now where I'm willing to work with anybody on this to make sure we get it passed next year. But I don't think it sends a very good signal for us to add protections for judges and not peace officers. Thank you.
I recognize a member from Ramsey, Representative Curran.
Thank you, Speaker, and thank you, members, and thank you so much to Chairs Moeller and Novotny for all the hard work this session. I think the Public Safety Committee came out of committee with a lot of good bills passed with quite a bit of agreement, even though we have a lot of disagreements on several different topics. I think this highlights a lot of good work that we can still get done when we take the time to work together here, and I'm sincerely appreciative of that. There's a few provisions that I wanted to speak to. First, I'm really glad that we're able to classify DPS data under the OJP programs as private. We know that studying what happens to people who are victims, survivors, studying what happens to people as far as outcomes, we know that that is going to be beneficial for us to make our laws better, to improve our systems and make things more efficient. But in that process, we want to make sure that we're protecting the individual's private information because we certainly don't want to further victimize anyone or put people at risk when we're trying to make situations better for everybody. And so again, really glad for the provision here that we're going to protect the data, and specifically through the offices of missing and murdered Black women and girls and missing and murdered Indigenous relatives. I did want to note as well, I know there's a provision in here offered by Representative Anderson, and I'm a co-author on that, and I just wanted to, I don't know if Rep. Anderson is here right now, but I just wanted to, there you are. I just wanted to say thank you for that. This is in direct response to a situation in our shared area where I'm sure a lot of folks heard this, where a student fraudulently enrolled enrolled in the White Bear Lake High School, and this was somebody who had done so at other schools and somebody who was attempting to fly under the radar as a minor in order to engage with minors. And that's something that our community takes seriously. That's something that I take seriously, and I appreciate the representatives who've signed on to the bill. And this is something that will provide some much needed comfort to my community so that we can ensure that people feel deterred by this, because it certainly is disturbing that people would have the audacity to pretend to be a child in order to engage with children. So thank you again for that. I am really glad that we are having this conversation and addressing an actual problem that we've seen in our community. And certainly, you know, we want to make sure that schools have all the tools available to them to ensure that, you know, students who are attending are who they say they are, and that there aren't loopholes in our systems. And so as we move forward, should we find that there are other ways to improve that so this situation can't happen again, I'd be glad to continue that work as well. But I think this is a really good start. I also wanted to talk a bit about the process to initiate hearings with the Court of Administrative Hearings. We have a clarification, and this was brought to us by the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. We have a clarification that allows for administrative hearings to happen. That it does it removes the requirement, I should say, that a hearing has to happen within the county where alleged discrimination occurred, and that deeply opens the effectiveness of this process. It makes it more efficient. It makes it more accessible. That we aren't being prescriptive of where a hearing must occur. We're just ensuring that we have a system that allows that to occur without barriers in the process. And so I'm really glad that this is something that's moving forward, that's being supported in part of this bill. We certainly want to make sure that folks have access to due process and have access to our court systems and aren't being forced to drive hours when there might be a facility much closer that they're able to get to and meet somebody at. I do just want to touch a little bit on a little bit about DOC licensing as well. Just to say that I appreciate the ongoing efforts. That every single time a DOC comes to us and they recognize that there's an opportunity to do better, that we take that seriously, we're taking it into consideration, and that we're passing it in bills like this. I really think that the licensing provisions that we have for corrections in our collective work here will make a great difference for people who are interacting with the system. It's common sense. And Mr. Speaker, I think, you know, ultimately I just want to ensure that folks realize that while there are some disappointments, and I hear Representative Duran when he's got some disappointments that his bill is not in here. I hear that. And I also know that there's ongoing conversations about data privacy, data practices, who that falls on, who it doesn't, how we might someday ensure that property records of other folks are protected. Those are ongoing conversations that we'll still have to have, but that is going to require more collaborative work together, because we really need to ensure that when we do pass those changes, that counties will be able to process those changes, that they're not going to be, they're not going to have all of these costs associated with that. We're going to need to set up a system that works for everybody statewide. So I do think that, it deserves, our data protections in general for different groups of people do deserve more attention, and I expect that the legislature would work on those things moving forward. And again, I know it's tough to, in this environment, work through conference committees and get agreements with the other body. I really do think that our members in public safety have a lot to be proud of. And I want to give special kudos to Representatives Johnson P. and Knutson. I think the presentations on providing protections for our first responders, our firefighters, that bipartisanship that you showed in committee, and the story that you laid out for all of us, and for those who aren't familiar with what firefighters and first responders are exposed to, thank you for that. Those are conversations that are so powerful, not just here at the Capitol, but for our communities to see that we do truly care about first responders. We care about them and we care about their safety. So lots of people to thank, but I will stop it there. Please vote for the bill. Thank you.
I recognize a member from Isanti, Representative Gordon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to echo the concerns that Representative West brought up. It's unfortunate that this bill includes a ban on the prediction markets. If you believe in free markets, personal freedom, and personal responsibility, then vote no.
I recognize the member from Morrison, Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just generally, there is something happening this session that I just want to urge caution over, and it's this attempt to literally prohibit something from happening in our state, rather than finding the appropriate guardrails for that given thing that's happening in our state. And today, that conversation is over prediction markets. And I share Chair West's comments that frustrated to see this prohibited and banned in Minnesota through this bill. And for members, I realize that we all represent a different district. Many of us represent a different generation, but for Gen Z and millennials, this is something that has a lot of popularity. And so for members, when you head home to go talk to your constituents and your voters, remember that this is something where instead of working to find the things that we can agree on, we're just outright prohibiting prediction markets. Outright prohibiting. And I oppose that. I'm opposing this bill because of that. And I am just concerned by this attempt from this legislature to just go about banning industries and banning new technology as if it's nothing, without care for the benefits and the things that people enjoy, the things that are advancing the future in Minnesota. Instead, we're literally saying, don't like this, don't like this, don't like this, don't like this, and I'm going to use the power of the government to prohibit it. And I don't appreciate that, and I don't believe that younger Minnesotans appreciate that either. So that's why I'm voting no on this bill today.
I recognize a member from Dakota, Representative Roach.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Oh, man, we've got some things in common today. I agree. I'm really upset with this bill and the complete overstep that we're about to move into by passing this bill. There's some great things in there. I mean, there really is. And I appreciate the work of the members of the Public Safety Committee that put in the work to get some of these provisions in here, and there's some good things. I don't agree with the way we're going about it. I think many of these bills can be voted on individually, as we should be doing. You know, prior to this week, we were only on the House floor twice a week. Twice a week. We should be here more often voting on bills individually, one by one, not packing them together and putting them all in one big package. We're voting on, you know, getting rid of a market altogether with this prediction market bill. You know, simply, I mean, because, I mean, I don't know, let's just put it out there. We had a Democrat senator that, you know, voted, or I'm sorry, bet on the prediction market on himself to win in a primary. And now he's going to be the champion of bringing this bill forward and passing it and making it illegal after he put money in his pocket to do so. So I think it's a great overstep. It's a sad day for Minnesotans and how we legislate here. And I hope Minnesotans are paying attention and watching and push back on these large provisional omnibus bills that put many, many bills together at once and make members vote for the bad with the good. I urge a no vote.
I recognize a member from Anoka, Representative West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are a few good things in this bill. Frankly, I'm surprised that some things got dropped. They seemed like very good ideas that fell by the wayside. But the real frustration is, an amendment was snuck in on the House floor to prohibit prediction markets. And this is a very bad idea, chiefly because we do not have the authority as a state to do so. Every single state that has done this finds itself in litigation, and they're starting to lose that litigation as just a couple weeks ago. So this is going to cost the state who knows how much in legal fees for no actual gain, because these are regulated by the CFTC, not the state. Unlike a wager, there is no setting of odds with a built-in margin for the house. Everything in a prediction market is done live based on what people actually think. And as a result, they're actually more accurate than most other forecasting, if not all other forecasting. Because there is something about when you put money behind something, it means a little more than, say, a poll. So pushing out this technology does not help at all. And some people might say, well, hey, legal sports betting, which we also don't have in Minnesota, has consumer protections. And this argument I find is particularly silly because if you are somebody who participates in sports wagering and you bet on a team and you happen to win, and then say you develop a system and you start winning and winning and winning and winning, the casinos take away your ability to participate. So if they see themselves losing, they will remove your ability to participate. But if they see you losing, ooh, they are happy not to provide the consumer protection that you need. Now, a prediction market doesn't have that, shares that negative quality, but at least if you're winning, you do not get unfairly treated. It's a lot more fair way of doing it. So, unfortunately, prohibition doesn't work. If prohibition worked, we would live in a utopia where we prohibited all bad things. But when you prohibit things, you just move it into the shadows. And that is exactly what we're going to see here. We're going to see no gain for the public. We're going to see massive losses in our litigation costs related to losing a case against the federal government. And we're going to take away something that thousands of Minnesotans already do for nothing. Just doesn't make any sense. So unfortunately, with the other things in this bill that are not necessarily bad, this is so bad for the state of Minnesota, it merits a no vote. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Recognized member from Hennepin, Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I rise today to praise both of our chairs on the work. I enjoyed being on the Public Safety Committee. This is my first time serving. But I specifically want to address some of the things we've heard about prediction markets, because folks will be probably already know that since Minnesota was a territory, we regulated gambling. But it's only been in the last year that these prediction markets have been claimed to be regulated by the federal government. We are on solid legal ground, and the way I know that is that almost half of the states in the country are through legislation, litigation, or regulation, fighting and asserting their power to decide if we want gambling, and when we do, like we have here in Minnesota, whether it's charities, whether it's casinos, whether it's horse races, the rules are set by Minnesotans, i.e. the legislature. So we have decided that we are worried about 18-year-olds gambling. And right now, it's a real concern. And one of the reasons we're banning prediction markets is we've seen, there was a Wall Street Journal article about teenagers. We just finished talking about teenagers on social media. Teenagers on social media on their phones are getting marketed to by Kalshi and Crypto.com and all of the other prediction markets. And we are seeing a rapid rise in problematic gambling of young people. We should be about protecting those young people in the same way we are about social media from these prediction markets. And it's not happening on its own. People are making billions of dollars on this. This explosion of gambling is not time immemorial. It is in the last year, 2 years that we have seen it. And so what we are doing here is actually asserting Minnesota's authority to do what we have always done, which is say we as a state should decide how best and what regulations we think should attach to gambling to protect public safety, to protect our kids, and frankly, and we've seen this in these prediction markets, to protect the gambling itself. Because in the last week, if you open any newspaper, and it'll be next week too, this week we saw that it was campaign staffers who've been betting on their own races or on the races they're working on with insider information. Last week it was candidates. The week before that it was special operations folks who have been working on the Maduro raid. So when you think about and when we hear conversations about whether we're talking about markets or about gambling, the idea that they should be fair and that you should not be duped if you are a part of it is fundamental. And that is fundamental to our jobs. And right now, what we are seeing, whether it's CalShear, whether it's people illegally doing it on Polymarket, or whether it's Crypto.com, or whether it's any number of these, we are actually seeing in real time that these markets are being rigged by insiders that are, and all of this is happening. And so people, consumers who are participating are actually being defrauded, which is another thing we should be focused on, is when there are places when individuals, consumers are being defrauded, we should regulate and get involved in that. This is a good bill that does that. We are joining dozens of other states, red states and blue states, who are trying to both protect the public and protect our markets from these shadowy financial gambling markets. And I am proud that we are doing this, and I'm proud that it's in this bill. Thank you.
I recognize a member from Dakota, Representative Berg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do not rise to talk about prediction markets. But I did want to just point out a provision in the bill, House File 3707, and this is providing some of the same protections to our unemployment insurance judges and our paid medical leave judges that we've afforded to other judges. As you can imagine, people seek out unemployment benefits or paid family leave benefits when things are really hard in their lives. And so they are looking for a little relief. They are looking for what they need to address either a medical situation or loss of an income. And so, as you can imagine, the judges that determine these, determine whether or not it's approved, oftentimes can be ruling on a decision that is pretty serious and harmful for people. And so we know that there have been situations when unemployment insurance judges or paid medical leave judges have made a ruling that that someone didn't expect, and they have been threatened. And we heard stories of them being stalked and harassed and followed from their workplaces to their cars or homes. And so I was really happy to see this included in this bill. It's a good provision to just make sure we're taking care of our judges in the way across the board that we have taken care of other types of judges. So wanted to flag that as a really good piece that ended up in this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize a member from Ramsey, Representative Moeller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a couple of provisions in this bill that I wanted to highlight. First, I'll just thank Representative Hansen for her work on the jail medications issue. So last year, we passed a bill with really broad bipartisan support to make sure that people who are in local jails had the medication they need. And surprising to all of us afterward, there was a lawsuit. And so we worked on the language, Jess and the other stakeholders did, to really just provide clarity. And so every time I talk about this bill, I want to make sure that we're saying that we don't think there was anything wrong with the language that we passed last year, but as is often the case, we come back and provide clarity in a future year. So really appreciate that work. But I do want to spend some time talking about the domestic violence provisions in this bill. When I became a prosecutor in the late 90s, The Violence Against Women Act was fairly new, and there were a lot of efforts at that time to make sure that people in the system who worked in the system really knew how to investigate those cases, prosecute those cases, really understand the trauma around domestic abuse and different behaviors of victims and get them connected with advocates. And it's really been unfortunate to me to see a slide over the years. I think what has happened is that a lot of us who came or who were trained at that time period, that really those people have either retired or moved on. And so I think there's a lot lacking. I know I had a case when I was still prosecuting in the interim where there was a victim who had some significant head trauma. And the response she got from the police on the scene was not great. But what ultimately happened was the state was still able to bring charges against her perpetrator, and she did not come to court. They had other evidence that they used. And the judge in that case made a comment that it's really just terrible that these victims don't show up because these things would be different. And it just showed me a complete lack of understanding about how these cases work, and that somehow along the way, maybe this judge did not receive that kind of training. Ultimately, that conviction happened, went up to the Supreme Court, and it was reversed, frankly, because the victim wasn't there. We tried to get some of her statements in otherwise, especially based on the fact that she had significant head trauma. And again, it felt like there was a lack of understanding about how those cases worked. And so since that time, I have just seen so many cases and headlines about this issue. In fact, my staff probably gets sick of me texting them, like every day I read the paper and I'm like, here's another story. And so I really took some time over the interim to dig into this issue. And what I found, first of all, is that we really don't have good data collection in Minnesota around domestic violence. The Bureau of Criminal Apprehension puts out a report every year about violent crime, but that's not really included because a lot of these cases are misdemeanors. And so this bill will make sure that we're, first of all, just even collecting data. So it's not just someone's gut feeling if there are more cases or not. We'll actually have some data behind that. Some of these cases, too, that we've heard about over the years, just even in recent years, I mean, they're really horrible cases. There was one in November of 2025 where a man and a woman were found shot to death in a car parked near Rosedale Center, so really not far from here at all. It was believed to be a murder-suicide. There was a child in Hanska who called 911, this is also in November, and said his mom's ex-boyfriend broke into their house and shot his mom. Officers arrived to find two victims dead from gunshot wounds, a 50-year-old man and a 32-year-old woman. Again, just in November, a man and woman in their 80s were found shot to death in their Minneapolis home when police suspected it was a murder-suicide. So I give you these examples to show, first of all, it happens all over the state. Also, it happens to people of all different ages, and there are often innocent people around as well, like children or other boyfriends or friends or family or neighbors that are impacted by these. And if you haven't taken a look, you should really look at Violence Free Minnesota's homicide report. They try to keep track of the data that we really should as a state be trying to keep track of those cases where there are known or suspected cases of homicide that are domestic violence cases. So just in 2026, in January, we have Skylar Keel, 19-year-old from Hopkins, was shot and killed inside her apartment by her boyfriend, who is 20 years old. We have Haley Tobler from St. Cloud, 22 years old, shot in February, or stabbed to death inside her apartment in St. Cloud sometime in February. Her husband was charged with that case. And according to court records, he was previously charged with a misdemeanor count of disorderly conduct from June of 2025, in which he strangled her and damaged some of their property. In And actually, I think she was the daughter of a known Republican candidate. We also have Ashley Kittleson, age 35, in March of 2026. She was shot to death in her home in International Falls, and investigators believe her husband shot her and then killed himself. She had an emergency protection order filed on February 27th and wrote that he had a history of physically assaulting her, threatening to kill her, and putting a gun to her head. He was charged with violating the order, once for trying to break into her home and again for calling her from jail. He followed her in his vehicle and rammed her car, resulting in a domestic assault charge. On March 2nd, he was released from jail without bond. And I could mention a couple other cases, but I'm going to stop there for a minute because I'm not offering those examples of those cases for dramatic impact or anything like that. I want you to know that in this bill, we saw these cases and we actually are taking action with this bill. So the case of Ashley Kittleson that I just read, where she had this order for protection, what I had read was that the judge apparently didn't read the underlying facts in the order for protection when her offender was released from jail. And so in this bill, we're saying judges need to look at all of those underlying facts, both from that case and other cases. We also say in this bill that if law enforcement's called to a scene of domestic violence and the offender is what they call gone on arrival, in the current law, you can still arrest that person without a warrant for only 72 hours. We heard powerful testimony from Jana Williams, whose niece Allison was murdered, and that was a factor in so many times they had called law enforcement in the past in her case before she was killed, because those cases were falling through the cracks. That 72-hour time period, offenders knew they could just escape or hide out for that short period of time, and then often an arrest warrant wasn't brought after that. So we have now expanded that to 14 days. Those arrests can happen, and we also encourage law enforcement to seek an arrest warrant during that time period. And then the other thing we do is once the offender is taken to the jail, and if whoever's in charge of the jail decides to release that offender before they see a judge, we have a number of factors, again, that they have to consider the whole history of this, the relationship between these two, relationship involving domestic violence or orders for protection or other information. We also make it easier for prosecutors to get some of that information electronically to the judges to make sure that they have all of the information they need before deciding whether or not to release somebody in those conditions. So this bill is really, really important for not only victims of domestic violence, but for public safety in Minnesota. And I'm really sad to hear that people across the aisle may not vote for it because they want prediction markets to exist so that people can vote on outcomes like war or assassinations. It's mind-boggling to me. I can understand if there are some aspects of that that you don't like. But it's mind-boggling to me that you're wanting those prediction markets to happen outweighs what we're trying to do here with protecting victims from domestic violence and really protecting the public. So I do hope that you'll think about those important provisions in this bill if you are deciding to cast a no vote. I'll also note that this bill passed 57-9 in the other body, so it had very broad bipartisan support. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I recommend a green vote. Thank you.
I recognize a member from Sherburne, Representative Novotny.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will not do my usual good bill, vote green. I will make a brief comment repeating what Representative Duran was talking about with the dropping of the peace officer safety bill. When we first presented this bill last week, it was in the lens that we'll be also talking about a capital security bill. And I will tell you that this being dropped is a hit, and it did have a chilling, definitely a chilling effect on how negotiations for the capital security will be going on. If you'll remember, I mentioned the third rail provision that some legislators are accused of being in a world where we don't live in the same world as the real people, and now we've proved that. We've proved that by saying that judges get more protection than the law enforcement officers that have the first contact with these people when they're most worked up, when they're most likely to be aggravated, when they're most likely to seek revenge. So I was not as upset as Representative Duran was, who was rightfully upset about that, but I was upset. And as things go for the rest of the week, we'll see how things go. As far as this bill goes, Representative Chair Moeller is right. The overall things of this bill are good if one provision that is, to me, just a workaround to get around online gambling is enough to make you vote no. That makes me sad. But think about the good things that are in this bill, and I urge a green vote.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. Members, please vote. The clerk will call the names of the members voting remotely.
Momani Hildsley. Momani Hildsley.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 100 yeas and 32 nays, the bill is repassed as amended by conference and its title agreed to. Messages from the Senate.
Message from the Senate, Madam Speaker. I hereby announce that the Senate accedes to the request of the House for the appointment of a conference committee on the amendments adopted by the Senate to the following House file. House File Number 3900, an act relating to state government proposing an amendment to the Minnesota Constitution. The Senate has appointed as such committee Senators Kunish, Hemmingson Yeager, Swazinski, and Farnsworth. The message is signed Thomas S. Bodden, Secretary of the Senate.
Messages from the Senate.
Message from the Senate, Madam Speaker. I hereby announce the Senate refuses to concur in the House amendments to the following Senate file number 4476, an act relating to state government, modifying provisions relating to human services. The Senate respectfully requests that a conference committee be appointed. The Senate has appointed as such committee Senators Hoffman, Fateh, Wicklund, and Abler. Message is signed Thomas S. Bodden, Secretary of the Senate. Schumacher moves that the House accede to the request of the Senate and that the Speaker appoint a conference committee of 4 members of the House to meet with a like committee appointed by the Senate on the disagreeing votes of the 2 houses on Senate File Number 4476.
I recognize the member for Morrison, Representative Kresha.
That is his motion.
All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Any opposed, say nay. The motion prevails. Announcements by the Speaker.
Announcement by the Speaker. The Speaker announces the appointment of the following members of the House to a conference committee on Senate File 4476. Schumacher, Gilman, Knorr, and Keeler.
Messages from the Senate.
Message from the Senate, Madam Speaker. I hereby announce the passage by the Senate of the following Senate file herewith transmitted. Senate file number 5200. The message is signed Thomas S. Bodden, Secretary of the Senate.
First reading of Senate bills.
First reading of Senate file number 5200, an act relating to legislative enactments. The bill is being referred to the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration.
Motions and resolutions. There are copies of the non-controversial motions at the House desk and online. If there is no objection, we'll take actions on these motions first. Hearing no objection, the motions prevail. Motions and resolutions.
NISCA moves that the rules of the House be so far suspended so that House File number 3945 be recalled from the Committee on State Government Finance and Policy, be given its second and third readings, and be placed upon its final passage.
I recognize a member from Anoka, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. That is my motion. I believe Representative Hollins would call this threatening her with a good time. This is her bill to create a super tax that would, a new energy super tax that would apply to all Minnesotans. Mr. Speaker, I request a roll call.
Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Niska.
And I'm going to urge members to vote no on this motion.
I recognize a member from Carver, Representative Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this was scheduled for State Government Finance, and I can't tell you how excited I was to talk about it because Republicans have been talking about affordability for the last 2 years. As we talk to our constituents out in district and as we get emails from them, we hear again and again and again and again and again, we cannot afford life in district after $18 billion surplus was erased, $10 billion in new taxes, all kinds of new user fees. And Mr. Speaker, it's a little loud in the chamber if you could.
Members, please take your conversations into the alcove or
Thank
the
you,
retiring room.
Mr. Speaker. Republicans have been advocating for affordability. And this new proposed super tax has potentially devastating effects for people who live in places like Carver County, where Representative Ream and I represent. Representative Ream, I think you're an author on the bill. We calculated some of the costs, and a sheet is coming out to you. The average cost per family in aggregate would be roughly $7,243. You calculate that over 5 years, it's going to be roughly $35,000 per family of unaffordability. All because of a 30-year look-back tax on people who provide things that we use every single day. And some of our members will talk about different things, but here's something that's really, really important. I would love to know how we are to look our constituents in the eye, Representative Ream, Representative Tabke, Representative Rayrauer, each of you are on that bill, and help them understand how they are to stand up to $35,000 that is to be tacked on to their yearly budget. How does that happen? And here are some of the potentially large downfalls that we have. You know, so the attack is effectively on people who make energy and would be attacks against some of those people, some of which, as we've seen in California, will choose to leave that state. With it, thousands of jobs may potentially go away. Those jobs are in districts that each of us represent, some more concentrated than others. Some members on that side may have higher concentrations of those workers in your district who will find themselves potentially out of a job because of this. Here's another one going back to my municipal days. This will increase the costs of consumption for fuel for cities, counties, townships, school districts, MnDOT, the State Patrol, and all kinds of other organizations that do an amazing job to keep us both safe and our roads plowed, as we talked about last week, or I think it was that last week where we honored snowplow drivers. Well, that's going to go up. If you think about it also, it's going to have a major impact on the consumer cost of airfare, because airplanes fly into MSP, they're going to fill up. That cost calculated, as we've done the math and we've worked with partners, and we've seen from the chamber that has put out this, and I hope you all have gotten this. It's good reading. You might want to take a moment to read it. But this is going to post a lot of costs onto places like the airlines at MSP. We have heard on constant refrain just how expensive airfare has gotten. That's a really detrimental effect that this super tax that you've all got going would pass on to airlines. I talked about school districts, and I think some of our other members will talk about this as well, but I talked to one of the Carver County school districts, and if this were to become law, and as Leader Niska said, and I just want to urge you all again, this is a no vote. We'd like to see what your thoughts are on it, but this could put another $1.6 million annually onto the cost of getting kids to school, onto a school district. And as you all know, school districts cannot simply increase their levy at the end of every year. They cannot do that. They would have to go to an operating referendum. They'd have to pass an operating levy just to cover the unaffordability of this bill. You know, I had mentioned California. If you read some of the articles, Governor Newsom is now begging many of those refineries to come back to the state of California because they are having problems. So I again ask you, before we go on to some of our other members, this is making Minnesota less affordable. It's going to have huge impacts on business. Obviously, a business that sells something is going to have to pay to have that shipped in. Once again, unaffordability around groceries, that's going to go up. Unaffordability for your back-to-school kids, clothing, school supplies, that's all going to be more expensive. Anything that you go to buy at the hardware store, it's going to be more expensive, because we would like to do this super tax. A 30-year retroactive tax back that will begin to cripple Minnesota businesses. I look forward to seeing your vote, particularly those of you that are the authors on this. I think it'll be illustrative. I think it'll be talked about in Carver County, for sure. I think it'll be talked about in Scott County, for sure, because people would like to know what their members are trying to say to them. Do you actually stand for affordability, or would you like to drive your constituents into the ground with a tax back, the super tax? So I'll have some things to say later, but I did want to bring your attention to the back of the sheet that I passed out. There are some chambers of commerce. I believe the pages are passing it out. I'm not sure. I think it's on its way out. Some of you have it at your desk. I thought I'd point out that the Shakopee Area Chamber and Tourism opposes House File 3945. That's an interesting read. One of the Carver County Chambers of Commerce, the Waconia Chamber of Commerce and Visitors Bureau, similarly opposes this. That'll be interesting once we see some votes. So members, as we progress through our speakers, and I'll finish up, and then Leader Niska will finish up in the end, I'm encouraging a no vote. If you believe that you stand to benefit your constituents in an affordable way, and this was talked about, I believe, at the press conference, that one of the members of the press conference said that they didn't want any impacts to be passed along to people who live in Main Street, Minnesota. I agree. I don't want people who live in Waconia, Minnesota, or Victoria, Minnesota, or Mayer, Minnesota, Cologne, Minnesota, or Chanhassen, or Chaska. I don't want them to have to say, holy cow, I got $35,000 added onto my yearly budget. I'm not sure how that is going to make it so that I can withstand the pressure of this super tax. So we're going to talk a lot more, and I look forward to getting back to you once we're done. But I think that, Mr. Speaker, there are some other folks on the list that I think are going to talk about some sharp issues that potentially impact Minnesotans in different walks of life and in different districts around the state. But members of my colleagues on the other side, those of you that were authors that I might have called out, your folks are watching.
I recognize a member from Waseca, Representative Sexton.
Good evening, members. As many of you know from the Energy Committee, I've done a little work in pipelining, a little work in refining. And one of the things we focus on is safety. In fact, I think I mentioned safety, 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 which actually costs money. Members, Minnesotans need safe, reliable, affordable energy. What this bill does is penalizing the industry that has provided that for the last 100 years. We've evolved to that. And this bill goes back 30 years and said, you know what? Everything you did, you get all the permits, you did it all legally. But Speaker, somehow we are finding them guilty. Somehow we think we're on an island here in Minnesota. We're not dependent on electricity that's generated some other place that comes across our borders, oil that passes from Canada down through Minnesota into our refineries and burned in our cars, our vehicles, our tractors, our transportation that brings groceries to the grocery store, that feeds our economy. Somehow we're just going to penalize that entire industry. We're going to go back 30 years. Why 30 years? Why not just 10 years? Why are we focused on a legal industry that operates safely and suddenly says, you're not doing it right? This is absolutely ridiculous. And members, this is absolutely going to cost a lot of money. That industry is going to say, fine, we'll shut down our refineries. We'll give up 1,400, that's 1,400 great-paying union jobs here in Minnesota in the metro area. We'll just let them go down to Houston, where I worked for a couple years. And the 4,000 other people who work in the industry when they do a turnaround, our contractors and such, we'll tell them the same thing because that industry will leave. And then we will turn around and see trucks bringing fuel in, fueling our interstate, because we have really no good alternative right now. We can't just crank out a bunch of electric cars. We really don't have an electric trucking industry. This is absolutely unaffordable and really penalizes everybody who is a member of this body, as well as a constituent and a resident of the state of Minnesota. Let's talk about aviation again. It was touched on earlier. You know, a lot of times you may have a flight that starts out in Detroit, goes to Chicago, comes to Minneapolis, it will refuel, reverse that route, and go all the way back to Detroit via Chicago. Now it won't be cost, it will be cost prohibitive because of all the fuel that is actually produced in the refinery, piped over to Minneapolis, St. Paul, and put in those aircraft. In fact, the governor talked about promoting the sustainable aviation fuel industry. And that's what our refineries here in the state of Minnesota are doing. However, we're going to turn them all off. They're going to walk away. And now all that fuel is going to have to be trucked at a very, very high cost. And in fact, the industry may say, hey, we're in competition. This is capitalism. We'll just refuel in Chicago. So when we fly up to Minneapolis, St. Paul, we'll land heavier, we'll taxi heavier, and we will actually cause our runways, our taxiways, and everything else to wear out sooner. And that's another tax that will be passed down to all of our constituents, everybody who comes to Minnesota. Why come to Minnesota? It's just frickin' expensive. It's all self-imposed. Members, I strongly urge a no vote to this bill.
I recognize a member from St. Louis, Representative Zalesnikar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, who's ready for another super tax in Minnesota? Well, this is a 30-year grab-back law. And if this body is interested in lowering costs for Minnesota, this bill truly makes 0 cents. And how is this bill going to affect those who live in Two Harbors, Proctor, Rice Lake, Hermantown, West Duluth, or the 14 townships I represent? Well, I think it's going to have negative implications. 20,000 of them are aged 20 to 59, which is 48% of the population in my district, and 3.1% of that group are below poverty level. About 20,000 of them are 62 and older on a fixed income. Another 48% of the population, and 8.4% of them are below poverty level. A bill with a 30-year grab back on those who are deemed responsible for all carbon emissions since 1995. Affects all the businesses who did everything right. They made our economy run. Actually, they made it hum rather well when Minnesota was a beacon. They extracted fossil fuels or they refined petroleum products. So who are these companies? Just, small companies like Chevron, Shell, BP, or companies who operate refineries that convert crude oil into gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, asphalt, other companies who extracted coal for electricity generation, for steel making, for industrial use. These companies will now have to shift costs to Minnesotans for higher electricity, fuel, food, everyday goods. A bill like this is going to easily add costs to Minnesotans totaling conservatively $500 a month, at a time when seniors are still upset that they have to pay tax on their Social Security in Minnesota. They didn't get that yet either. But they're going to have $500 more a month to just come up with it when they have a fixed budget. The April revenue that we all got today shows more money taken in from, guess what, individual taxes. And not one email I get is saying, please add more taxes. Please reduce the amount of money I have to buy groceries and to live. Taxes, taxes, taxes for Minnesotans. So when the businesses leave, the jobs leave, and when the jobs leave, the people leave. It's common sense, Minnesota, and it's time to make common sense common again and vote no before we have more people choosing to leave this great state for a more affordable state. We need to make Minnesota affordable, and this is super tax is not going to make anything more affordable. Vote no.
I recognize a member from Goodhue, Representative Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in strong opposition to this, the super tax bill, due to the negative impacts it's going to have on rural communities, and specifically within the agriculture community. If you wanted to create a bill that would speed up the consolidation of agriculture and create mass migration out of rural communities here in the state of Minnesota, well, congratulations, you came up with the perfect bill. Mr. Speaker, could you quiet down the chamber a little bit? Thank you very much. This will essentially create the death of small towns in greater Minnesota. These small towns house businesses, that are fundamental to the agriculture community. They have families. They have all sorts of entities that are operating out of them. But specifically in the agriculture world, when you start doing something like this, you're going to raise the cost of electricity to run the fans in barns, grain dryers. The fuel that we need to run tractors, trucks, harvesting equipment, the LP it takes to be able to heat these barns, homes, grain dryers, greenhouses that raise your food. This bill, as it stands, will gut, and I mean it will gut, what's left of small family farming operations throughout the state of Minnesota. You won't see the land change hands. It'll stay in their possession for a long time, the families' possession for a long time. But it's just going to be larger operators that are running the ground. Just alone in my farm, on my place, after the decisions that were made in 2023 and 2024, you know what I was paying for electricity around my place? Somewhere between about $250 to $300 a month, just on our small farming operation. You know what happens now? Just recently in the last year, at our place, $550 to $600 a month. Nothing has changed. We're still running the same refrigeration equipment to cool milk. We're still running everything the same as we have in the past, but it is literally doubled. And that's the remarkable part about this. There was an interesting quote that was made by John F. Kennedy, and he was talking about something he had heard from Purdue through the extension service out of Indiana. And for every dollar that is created in a rural community, it turns 7 times. That is the impact it has in our communities. By doing something like this, the ethanol industry that we have here in our state, we are #1 when it comes to biofuels in the U.S. You will drive that out of this state. At one point in time, we could have been home to poet ethanol. And do you know what happened because of regulation and rules? They're sitting in South Dakota, not here, not my community, Wanamingo, where the family is from. This happens over and over and over again. And you're going to make it more unaffordable for us to be able to do it. I'll liken it to the silos that you see dotting the rural countryside as you're driving down any major interstate. I think of them as a tombstone to what happened in the 80s because of high interest rates and poor pricing. There's farmers that ended up going out of business because of the interest rates and what was going on at that point in time. And it was devastating. Only this time there's not going to be silos. It's just not going to be there. You're going to see those families and those operations disappear. Let's think about this also as far as how much money is Minnesota invested currently as it stands with investments in clean water, in conservation programs, specifically around sustainable agriculture. The money that we've pumped into that, millions of dollars through Minnesota Department of Ag. The cover crop programs that we've done through Minnesota Department of Ag. The equipment programs through Minnesota Department of Ag. You may as well just throw in the money in the dumpster and lit it on fire, because there won't be any operations that will be able to capitalize or utilize that like they should. It's going to be done. Members, there's better things that we can do other than taking a look at a bill such as this. And it's going to put so much that we've invested in the state of Minnesota, whether it's being #1 in turkey production, corn, pork, beef, dairy, all the work that we've put into that. And all those dollars turning in these rural communities will disappear. I urge a no vote.
I recognize the member from Pope, Representative Anderson, PH.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members, and carrying on the impact a bill such as this would have on agriculture. I can't hardly wrap my arms around it. When I first saw the measure, it was like, this can't happen here in Minnesota. I've said for years and years, we are an agricultural powerhouse, one of the top states in the nation, and this would extremely negatively impact agriculture here in Minnesota. And I'm not quite sure folks on the other side think that, we can tax wealthy people, we can tax corporations, and nobody else is going to get hurt. This, I guarantee, will get passed down to the end consumers, the guy that drives a car, the mom that takes her kids to school, the school buses, and farmers will be impacted tremendously negatively by a bill such as this. And to give you just a small idea of how important fuel is to farmers, I run today kind of a small operation farm. I have 6 tractors. Some of them are pretty old. I have one nice tractor. It's called a 580 quad track. It has 4 tracks, doesn't have wheels, and the 580 stands for 580 horsepower in that tractor. And it can get a lot of work done. But when I'm pulling that tractor heavy, it has a monitor on it, and it's taking about 25 gallons of fuel an hour. Now, the tank on that tractor holds close to 500 gallons, so I can go a couple of days and then have to go back to the fuel barrel and put on fuel. And that's literally thousands of dollars a day, a couple $1,000 just to fuel that one tractor that does my heavy tillage work. And it would just impact and just totally upside down what happens to farmers when they try to make a cash flow. And another thing regarding agriculture and farming, farmers are what you call price takers. We don't set the price that we get to offer when we sell our corn to the elevator or soybeans to the processing plant. We take what the market will give us. And what happens when the price of fuel increases, this happens to truckers, it also happens to railroads. They will put into what they call a rail or fuel surcharge, which means they will charge more because their cost has gone up. Now, from where I live in west central Minnesota, a lot of our corn goes out to the West Coast to be shipped overseas, and it costs about $1 a bushel when diesel fuel prices are what I'd say are moderate. $1 a bushel in these big rail cars to get it out to the West Coast. But when they institute a fuel surcharge, that cost can go up to $1.20, $1.25 a bushel that costs the elevator to ship that grain to the West Coast. And again, I said farmers are fuel price takers. What that means is it's a double hit for farmers because the elevator then has to lower the price they will pay farmers because they have to make up the cost of the increased price of diesel fuel to run the railroads and trucks. So it's a double hit for farmers in what they pay for the fuel they use and a lower price they will get when they sell their crops to go to market. And it was mentioned ethanol in this state. We have 17 ethanol producers in Minnesota, and they produce ethanol. And we are a large user of E15 gasoline in Minnesota. And in 2025, I looked it up, and there's about 550 stations in our state that offer E15, and about 144 million gallons of E15 was pumped into consumers' cars last year in 2025. And at an average savings of about 15 cents a gallon, that's about $21 million a year saved by Minnesota motorists by using that cheaper fuel in their cars and pickups. It's a big savings to people all across the state. And those things may go away if our ethanol plants have to leave the state because they can't compete with our states that don't offer these types of disincentives to production that we do here in Minnesota. So again, I would also strongly urge a no vote on the motion because we just simply can't afford more taxes, which will eventually get down to the consumer, to the farmer, and negatively impact us as we try to keep this state a powerhouse in ag production. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the member from Lyon, Representative Swedzinski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, members. This bill just reminds me, one of its key hallmarks is that it looks back to 1995. And, as I was looking across this chamber today, I was thinking, what started? in 1995. And Spencer Igo, Representative Spencer Igo, who's no longer with us on the floor, he's off negotiating a bill, began his life in 1995. And if he was on the floor, I would say that's a long time ago. But since he's not, I won't. But the San Francisco 49ers won the Super Bowl in 1995. The Atlanta Braves won the World Series. Chatfield won the state championship in Minnesota State High School tournament for that school. The Geo Metro, the Honda Accent, the Ford Aspire, and the Suzuki Swift in 1995 could each be purchased brand new off the lot for just under $7,500. Brand new. And if you think of those beauties going down the road and the memories made, I want you to think back about how $7,500 and what that means to every single household here in the state of Minnesota. Members, the Chamber of Commerce said that they estimate that this super tax bill, which it is a super tax, has the potential to impact petroleum creators by over $85 billion over the next 5 years. Friends and members, if you want to put a Geo Metro in every garage or take one out of every garage, depends whether or not you will vote green or red on this bill. Members, this will impact households, this will impact families and business, and put a chilling effect with this super tax on industrial investment in our state. Members, this is dangerous. This is radical. The top song in 1995 was Gangster's Paradise by Coolio, an American classic. And just a note, in 1996, it was the Macarena, and I did win a Macarena dancing contest in 1996. I was the bomb. There might be video, I'm not going to share it with you. And to finish, ER. In 1995, the show we all love, ER, was the #1 show. 30 years ago. And it's my hope that this House file will be found dead on arrival. Vote no.
I recognize a member from Dakota, Representative Koznick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I always hesitate to follow Representative Swedinsky. But just to let people know, in 1995, I graduated college. Mary Franson says high school, so it was a while ago. And to think that we have to have a tax to go back retroactive that far is insane. To enact a super tax on Minnesotans retroactive to when I was in college, when Representative Igo was born, or Representative Franzen was in high school, does not make Minnesota more affordable. It's practically insane. But I rise to share with you, we've heard some stories of how this affects our agriculture communities and businesses. But I'm wondering if Vice Chair Ream would yield for a question, because it's going to affect our metro communities too.
Representative Ream, will you yield for a question? She will yield. Representative Koznick.
Representative Ream, Vice Chair on the Transportation Committee, do you know how much fuel Metro Transit uses on average for their busing systems?
Representative Ream.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Chair Koznick. I'm really glad we're having this conversation today about the climate crisis. I was listening to a show today about how it's impacting our youth, how people are feeling really despondent about the warmer weather, this unpredictable weather we're seeing, the rise in these storms. So I'm glad we're talking about this. And I know Minnesota has become a climate haven for a lot of people. People are moving here because they feel like they will be protected in this state from some of the terrible things that are happening along our coastlines. In response to some of the comments that are being made about airfare going up, I will say, as a vice chair of transportation, we're seeing a huge boom in people wanting to ride Amtrak. People want to ride trains now. Every other wealthy country has an amazing transit system and a train system, and I'm really glad that along with Chair Tabke, we are investing now in trains once again. We have a great system in our country and our state for moving soybeans, sugar beets across the state, but what we really need is a better, more robust system for moving people across the state in trains. So lots of good conversations are being held about trains, and I think that's a good thing. Carver County, which my friend Representative Nash has mentioned, it's changing too. A lot of the people move out to my area because they love the open area. They love the lakes, the marshes, our bike trails. And people in my area, they like to hunt too. They want to see beautiful spaces where they can go hunt. And they want to do it in weather that's conducive to that. And I know for me, when I had my kids when they were little, we were able to go out to the pool and do all kinds of fun stuff. Nowadays, parents can't take their kids to the pool on these super hot days because the temperatures are getting so extreme, which is why I'm really glad over the past 2-3 years that I've been here, we have invested in climate-friendly initiatives. I carried the Solar for Schools bill, which has helped our schools transition to solar. And we've done a lot of other things. I know I myself, I drive an EV. I'm trying to transition away from oil. I know we've got a huge illegal war happening right now that has caused the price of oil to skyrocket. And I am concerned about family farmers. I have a lot of relatives who actually farm in southwestern Minnesota. And years ago, they were concerned about the cost of fertilizer. It hasn't gotten any better with this illegal war. And if you want to talk unaffordability, let's talk about the tariffs. So I will say I think we need to be a lot less reliant on oil. And this Epstein war that we have going on out in the Middle East is causing us to rethink our dependence on oil. And I'm glad we are. I'm glad we're transitioning to more solar and more electricity. As to your first question, I wasn't prepared to talk about this bill. I'm happy to talk about it, but I don't have that specific answer for you.
Representative Koznick.
Thank you. And Representative Ream, I appreciate your comments. But Ream's dream about the trains, and we should be using more of them, when you pass the Superfund tax, we're going to have to be shipping in oil to fund our busing systems, fund our farms, and the trains will be full of oil transport, and we won't be able to utilize those transportation lanes to get people where they want to be if you can find people that want to ride the train. But members, you were close. It's probably about 5 million gallons of gas that we use currently to help move people around the cities in Metro Transit. And with the super tax, that's going to cost families about $7,200 annually by 2023. The super tax that's going to cost $7,200 annually and make it less affordable for Minnesotans. The Democrats' super tax is also going to make riding Metro Transit a lot more affordable. And if you do the math, it's going to be it's going to make it less affordable for Metro Transit. They're going to have to come up with $7.5 to $10 million just to cover the Democrats' super tax that they think they're helping families afford their lifestyle, that they think they're going to help riders who may be transit dependent are going to have to come up with that $7.5 to $10 million, or Minnesotans will have to cover that super tax of $7,200 annually. There's not a lot of super about taxing Minnesotans every turn they take. And so this super tax, like I was in 1995 in college, I think needs to go back and get a little work, be a little smarter on how we try to make Minnesota more affordable, not less affordable, like the Democrat super tax would.
I recognize a member from Cass, Representative Knutson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, Minnesotans are mad, but I don't even know if they're mad enough. I get emails, phone calls, and messages every single day from people across our state because they can't afford to live anymore. Groceries. Under Governor Walz, groceries are up 25 to 30%. Health insurance. People are dropping health insurance because the cost is unbearable. Utilities and property taxes. I just received a text message today from somebody that wrote their property tax check. Life is unaffordable in Minnesota, and the response the Democrats have this session, they come up with a brand new super tax. We're going to tax you more. We're going to make life more unaffordable for you. When I'm not here at the Capitol, I am an unpaid Uber driver for my children and all of their friends. I put on about 2,000, sometimes 2,500 miles a month, driving kids across the country. With this bill, you'll increase gas prices $2 a gallon. That's an extra $3,600 just to drive my kids to their activities. And I am not alone. There are parents across our state that are doing this. We cannot afford any more of your taxes. We're done. People are fleeing our state in droves because they can't afford to live here. And then this is the Democrats' response. Let's come up with a brand new way to tax them more, to make life more unaffordable. Minnesotans are mad, but I do not think that they are mad enough. It is time that they hit the streets. It is time that they rise up and show the Democrats that they're not going to take this anymore. Car tab fees. Look what you've done to car tab fees. People cannot afford another dime in taxes. We have a huge taxing problem in our state. We don't have an affordability problem. We have a taxing problem. And it's come from crazy ideas like this. The Democrats in Minnesota are making life unaffordable. and we can't take it anymore. There is a serious disconnect from that side of the aisle. And I hope every single Minnesotan hears this. I hope every single Minnesotan who is struggling to make ends meet right now hears this and realizes that it's not enough. Democrats want more. Members, vote no.
I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Hollins.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. What a treat. Thank you so much for bringing this forward. It was a surprise to me. But I guess now I understand why so many of you were putting into your e-updates that this bill might come to the floor. I was looking at those e-updates thinking, what? How? It didn't go through committee process. I'm not asking for it to come to the floor, but you all wanted to make sure that your constituents would be thinking that you had a big, bad, scary bill to fight. I get it now. It makes sense. This is a joke. We have just spent, what, half an hour, 45 minutes debating something that nobody on this side of the aisle asked for. It has not gone through committee process. I have not asked for it to go through committee process. I have not asked for this bill to come to the floor. In fact, we have admitted that this bill has some work to do. But I think it's really interesting that we want to have this debate and that we're calling it a new tax. It doesn't go to tax committee. It's not a tax. That we're talking about energy. It doesn't go to energy committee. It's purely an environment bill. It's so interesting that we're having this conversation when nobody here was asking for it. But I am relieved to see that some things never change, that the GOP side of the aisle is still interested in groveling to big oil companies and are more interested in protecting billionaires than they are in taking care of actual Minnesotans. This bill has been asked for by the people of Minnesota, and I'm going to recommend a no vote today because it was not my intention to bring it here and to have that conversation. We're going to wait to go through the proper channels and the proper process before we have a conversation on the floor. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the member from Carver, Representative Nash.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. We know sometimes you look at the bill introductions and you realize this is what they want. You know, when I put my name on a bill, I'm lending my name to the credibility of that bill. Some might say I'd like to see it pass into law, and once again, I just want to point out, Representative Ream, you put your name on this bill. To me, that says you would like to see this become law. Representative Tabke, you put your name as a proud author on this bill. It seems to me that you're endorsing—
Point of order.
Oh.
State your point of order.
Section 124, we should avoid using the members' names. A member must confine remarks to the proposal before the House and not members. Thank you.
Representative Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will say that the other member from Carver, not using your name, put their name on this bill. Seems like an endorsement. The member from Shakopee seems to make this an interesting case that this would like to become law. I will point out also, Representative Ream, you said that you see more people taking the train if the author or the member would yield.
Representative Ream, will you yield? She will yield. Representative Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Ream, can you tell us what sort of fuel trains use to go from state to state on Amtrak that you quoted?
Representative Ream.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Nash. I am not a train expert. I'm a commuter. So I don't think I can answer that question to the ability that you probably want. I'm sure you have the answer. But I will say trains run on all different types of fuel. If you look around the world, trains have different ways that they move around. They use different types of fuel.
Representative Nash.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Representative Ream, you quoted that you saw people taking more and more Amtrak. They use diesel. So you're making now an argument counter to the argument you made because it would drive up the cost of traveling by train. And that's not good, and it's faulty logic. You know, members, here's something. If you all remember several years ago, since Representative Swedzinski took us into the Wayback Machine, do you guys remember the guy named Jimmy McMillan in New York where he said, the rent is too damn high? You all talked about affordability. You all talked about making sure that Minnesotans can make it through life. Well, members, the cost is too damn high under this super tax. We are going to potentially drive companies out of the state. Representative Anderson talked about farmers who grow corn for ethanol. Well, if businesses close that refine ethanol, do you think that they're going to seek contracts from farmers who grow corn in the state of Minnesota? No, they're going to seek contracts with whomever actually is in the state of that refinery. So the costs are staggering. We've talked about the cost to schools and state patrol and small police agencies and snowplow drivers, and the state of Minnesota is going to have to bear a lot of that. So here's the question that I would ask all of you is, so we already have the cost of what it will cost families. Now let's think about the cost of what happens when all of the costs of the state get compounded back on top of the people who are taxpayers in the state of Minnesota. So if the cost to police via the Minnesota State Patrol goes up because they're consuming more fuel, guess what? That's on us, thanks to your bill. The cost of snow plowing in a municipality goes up, guess who's going to take that one on the chin? That's going to happen to the taxpayers of that city. Or the county, Carver County, if that goes up, they're going to see a higher fuel tax. Guess who pays that one? The residents of Carver County. The cost is too damn high. Now you look to California and you look at just the disaster that had happened there with Governor Newsom. And before we wrap up and before Leader Niska gets us to a vote, I will say this. For the love of lutefisk, please don't California our Minnesota, because the cost is too damn high with this super tax. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize a member from Anoka, Representative Cagle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And just a reminder, nobody likes lutefisk. But I do, oh, maybe Mr. Speaker does. Okay, so one person likes lutefisk. All right, so I actually want to talk about some stuff that we did to actually bring down home and energy costs. There was some great stuff, home energy efficiency tax credits for heat pumps, insulation, windows, and doors. You guys love tax credits, right? Residential clean energy tax credits for things like batteries and geothermal. Electric vehicle tax credits, again, another tax credit. You guys should love those tax credits. EV charger credit, clean electricity production and investment one. This was actually one that was really good. It did a lot of good for our communities because Cummins is actually one of the sorry, my computer's doing a restart here. Cummins, oh shoot. So Cummins is one of the organizations that does the electrolyzers, and they were on track to be the, well, I think they still are the only North American producer of the electrolyzers. Give me a second here. All my notes just disappeared off my screen. I apologize. Oh, e-bike, yeah, okay. Bear with me, please. I am sorry. I do not need an update on my computer right now. So we have the EV charger tax credit, clean energy tax production and investment credits. That's the one I mentioned where Cummins was becoming the only North American producer of the electrolyzers. Home energy rebates, especially for low and moderate income households. There's so many great things. We did some Minnesota-specific energy innovation, like, and And so the bottom line is, you know, there was a lot of cost savings provisions that we had in the Inflation Reduction Act. So now what? All of those programs I just listed were cut by the big, beautiful bill. So this is absolutely just silly, because all of the things that would actually save people money on their energy costs are things you guys hate. And it's just crazy to me that when we actually try and push affordability bills, corporate lobbyists show up and these bills disappear. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Any further discussion on the motion to suspend the rules? I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And, you know, I'm grateful that we're, I think, going to see a strong bipartisan rejection of this terrible bill today. Sounds like it. Honestly, one of the worst bill, I think probably the worst bill I've seen in my time at the legislature. But it comes with a very serious warning for the people of Minnesota. We heard what all the people of Minnesota should take as a very, very serious warning. We heard, first of all, the chief author running away from the bill saying no one on our side asked for this. Well, they filed the bill with the maximum number of co-authors, 35 co-authors. The chief author and the number 2 author are the 2 of the top 3 leadership positions in the DFL caucus. And there was a very ominous warning from the chief author that they're going to wait to go through the process. They're going to wait to go through the process. And when people of Minnesota, do you think they're going to go through that process? They're waiting for another trifecta to massively increase your energy costs. This bill would retroactively bill energy producers billions of dollars for legally producing oil and natural gas that Minnesota families, small businesses, and farmers have relied on for Minnesota, have relied on for generations. The people of Minnesota, the state of Minnesota has regulated this activity, encouraged it, depended on it to grow and prosper. And now, after all these years, so many years that I think Representative Koznick was graduating from high school, after all these years, we're going to turn around and send those same producers the bill for what we've been asking them to do. That's not serious policymaking. And we should unanimously reject this horrible bill. This can claim to aim at energy producers, and I heard Representative Hollins in the press conference announcing this, claim that it would be at energy producers. But anyone with even a basic understanding of economics knows the costs don't stay at the energy producers. They get passed down to every single Minnesotan in higher gas prices, higher electricity bills, higher grocery costs, higher transportation costs. They show up in every single part of our economy. And it affects our job producers here in Minnesota. Minnesota's 2 refineries supply about 70% of our fuel. You undermine them, and you don't just hurt that one industry. You create real concerns about fuel reliability across our entire state. We heard about how it hits farmers running equipment. It hits truckers hauling goods, manufacturers trying to stay competitive, small businesses just fighting to keep the lights on. And it hits cities, counties, schools, police, fire, snowplows, public works. Every one of those costs comes back to our taxpayers. It literally touches everything in our modern economy, every single step in the supply chain of everything that we depend on. Modeling would show that this bill costs the average household about $6,800 in the first year, $7,200 every year after that. Over 5 years, it's about $35,000 per person. That's what the next Democrat trifecta is offering the people of Minnesota. That's what the next Democrat trifecta is talking about after the last one raised taxes by $10 billion, blowing through an $18 billion surplus, growing government by 40%. And we're supposed to expect this won't make life more expensive? Minnesotans know better, and they're being warned. And this is extreme. Only 2 states, New York and Vermont, have enacted anything like this. And both of them are facing lawsuits. There are serious constitutional concerns about this, Commerce Clause concerns, federal preemption under the Clean Air Act, and we've seen recently another lawsuit filed against the state of Minnesota because of this Democrat officials in Minnesota's efforts to regulate the global energy market beyond the power of the state of Minnesota. So we're not just raising costs, we're putting Minnesota taxpayers on the hook to defend a shaky policy legally that would cost millions to litigate. Members, at a time when energy demand is rising, when our grid is under strain, when we should be encouraging investment and reliability, this bill does the exact opposite. It drives investment away, it tightens supply, and guarantees higher costs. And on top of all that, as if nothing could go wrong with this, it creates a massive government-controlled fund with limited transparency. Where have we heard about that before? What could possibly go wrong? Minnesotans have seen how that goes over the last nearly 2 decades of Democrat control of the executive branch: waste, abuse, and fraud. So you can talk about how you care about affordability, but when you introduce and highlight a bill like this, Minnesotans see through it. It makes life more expensive, it raises costs, it makes Minnesota less competitive. Passing this would be an expensive mistake. I'm grateful to hear that we are going to have maybe an unprecedented bipartisan no vote on this terrible idea. But Minnesotans know what's coming around the corner. I urge members to vote no.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the motion to suspend the rules. Members, please vote. The clerk will call the names of the members voting remotely.
Momani Hiltsley.
Momani Hiltsley, no.
Momani Hiltsley votes no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 0 yeas and 130 nays, the motion does not prevail. Messages from the Senate.
Message from the Senate, Madam Speaker. I hereby announce the passage by the Senate of the following Senate files herewith transmitted. Senate file number 4401 and Senate file number 4504. The messages are signed by Thomas S. Bodden, Secretary of the Senate.
First reading of Senate bills.
First reading of Senate file number 4401, an act relating to cannabis, modifying cannabis business and hemp business. The bill is being referred to the Committee on Ways and Means. First reading, Senate file number 4504, an act relating to energy. The bill is being referred to the Committee on Energy, Finance, and Policy.
Announcements. I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Hussein.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Speaker. This is a House resolution establishing an official partnership between the Minnesota Legislature and National Assembly of Djibouti, whereas Minnesota is home to one of the largest and most vibrant East African diaspora population in the United States, including a significant community of Djiboutian and heritage, which makes vital contribution to Minnesota economy, cultural, and social fabric. And
I recognize the member from Mauer, Representative Mueller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whereas the Republic of Djibouti is located in the crosswords of East Africa and the Middle East and serves as critical global hub for maritime trade and logistics. And
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Frazier.
Whereas the United States maintains its largest and only permanent military base in Africa, Camp Libeling in Djibouti, the base serves as an indispensable strategic hub supporting counterterrorism, security, and stability operations across the Horn of Africa and the Middle East, strengthening Djibouti's role as a trusted and reliable ally to the United States. And
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Nadeau.
Whereas the state of Minnesota and the Republic of Djibouti have a shared interest in expanding commerce, and official state-led trade missions are essential tools for promoting Minnesota businesses and exports in East Africa and fostering direct investment and job creation in both regions. And
I recognize the member from Carlton, Representative Dotseth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Whereas members of Minnesota State Legislature have already begun constructive engagement, including the U.S.-Djibouti Trade Initiative, aimed at forging strong business, academic, and cultural partnerships. And
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Mahmoud.
Whereas formalizing a direct parliamentary level connection will foster greater mutual understanding, facilitate the exchange of legislative ideas, and support expanded economic opportunities for businesses, workers in Minnesota and Djibouti. Now, therefore.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Long.
Be it resolved by the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration of the House of Representatives of the State of Minnesota that it formally extends a relationship of parliamentary friendship and cooperation to the National Assembly of the Republic of Djibouti and supports a Minnesota-Djibouti Parliamentary Working Group to coordinate future interparliamentary exchanges, economic and trade missions, and cultural events, and to solidify a lasting relationship dedicated to mutual prosperity, democratic partnership, and security cooperation.
Further announcements.
Point of parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Speaker.
State your point of parliamentary inquiry.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday we had a conversation about the Comprehensive Gun Violence Prevention Package, Senate File 4067, and I am curious if there is an update as to the bill's location.
I don't have an answer for you currently. There's nothing at the desk.
Mr. Speaker, point of parliamentary inquiry.
State your point of parliamentary inquiry.
Mr. Speaker, you had stated that you were instructed not to report the bill. It appears that it is still not at the desk. It has been 8 days. The instruction seems to have come from Speaker Demuth. The Speaker hasn't said much on this, but a House GOP spokesperson said that the, quote, Speaker has been clear that the bill would have to move through the committee process to the floor. So my parliamentary inquiry is, how does Senate File 4067 get to committee, Mr. Speaker?
I think Representative Niska has some information for you. If you would like me to call on him, we can get you some more information.
Sure.
Representative Niska.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Point of parliamentary inquiry.
I'll state that.
If you were to report Senate File 4067, could you explain the process that would be needed to bring it to the floor?
Sure. So in the 5 days that we have left, the House companion is currently in Judiciary. The Senate file would be referred there, then would need to pass Judiciary, where gun ban votes have already taken place and failed. It would need to receive a rules waiver. Given the bill's expansive scope, it would need additional hearings in public safety, human services, and education finance. Each of these committees would only be able to meet if the chairs and both leaders gave approval for additional hearings. It would then need to move through Ways and Means, and then it would need to be calendared for action on the floor by the Rules Committee. There simply is no path forward for it in the House. Even if the Speaker were to report the bill on Monday, there is not enough time for it to be clear all of the legislative hurdles that there are.
Point of parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Speaker.
State your point of parliamentary inquiry.
Mr. Speaker, is it easier or harder to do all of the things that you just listed if we had 8 more days to complete those actions in?
My math is not good in that instance, Representative Long.
Point of parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Speaker.
Continue.
Mr. Speaker, we can get things done fast around here. I, for one, am willing to make Rules Committee waivers if we need to in our committee. But you can't have it both ways. You can't say that this is not going to be coming to the floor because it has to go through a process and at the same time disappear the bill and not allow it to go through the committee process. It is very clear to the public why this bill is being held, and that is because there is not a desire to have a vote on this bill. We are hiding the bill and preventing it from coming into a vote. We have had up here today the individual doctors who were responding on the day of the Annunciation shooting at Children's Hospital and treating kids who were gun violence victims. We have had calls from Annunciation parents asking us to take action on this bill, to schedule it for a vote. The Minnesota public is asking for this. It has been 8 days. The bill is not here. You cannot hide behind process and say that the bill needs to go through a bunch of committee steps and at the same time say that we are going to hold on to the bill for 8 days and not allow it to go through a committee process.
I'll remind the body that each member in this House floor has the ability to introduce their own bills. This one is not in front of our House today. Announcements. Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 11 a.m. Wednesday, May 13th, 2026.
Representative Niska moves that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 11 a.m. Wednesday, May 13th, 2026. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed say nay. The motion prevails. Representative Niska.
I move that the House do now adjourn.
Representative Niska moves that the House do now adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed say nay. The motion prevails. The House stands adjourned until 11 a.m. Wednesday, May 13th, 2026.